continued.
We're on UK guns, so let's keep it rolling on UK and British Empire or Empire guns.
I got my hat on. I'm ready to go.
Put your hat on, but put your ostrich hat on.
Yeah, ostrich.
We're gonna start backwards with the Brown Bess.
Okay.
I'm curious though. Wikipedia says there are 7 patterns.
Well, let's walk through this.
Can you name the 7 in a row? There's an issue date according to Wikipedia, which is always right.
Okay. Well, I mean, presuming that it's starting with the long land.
Yep.
Okay. And then after that, there's a short land.
Yep.
Yeah. And then there's an India pattern.
Well, they technically say another one started early, but
that's another one.
But okay. You could keep going. Go ahead. Let's name it.
All right. So after the India pattern, that's from like the 1790s.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the New Land Light Infantry and the New Land.
Yep.
All right. So how many is that? That's only 5.
That's 5, and then there's 2 kind of. They look like they're the rare ones.
I'm just trying to think of what
for different kinds of troops. One is a sea service.
Oh, okay. But all right. Well, that's okay. Sure. All right. Yeah, this is a sea service.
One's a cavalry carbine.
Musket, right? Well, okay. That's why, because sea service arms are completely separate and different in terms of category from land service. That's why they're not called. They're like the long land pattern. It's not the long sea pattern, and they're different. And they were made for 2 completely different systems. Like the Navy was different than the Army. So that's why. Okay, got it. Yes, the sea service. And what was the other one you're talking about?
The cavalry carbine.
So there was no specific cavalry carbine in that era. There was light cavalry carbines, of which there's a couple. I actually have one's called an Elliott that was actually sort of developed in the late 1700s, but used all the way up and were undoubtedly used at Waterloo. And then there's the heavy cavalry carbines.
You don't think of any short rifles going back really that far?
Yeah, well, there's get this. You know the first British service rifle? What it was?
No, what was it?
The date will surprise you and be quite familiar to you, I'm expecting. It was the 1776 rifle. Can you guess what it was British? Can you guess what it was made for?
I have an inkling.
I would think something to do with the American Revolution.
Ding, 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 ding. So there's a requirement, a perceived need for a rifle in North America. And the British basically look to what they're familiar with. And for the British, the familiarity comes from Germanic arms. And any of the troops that have used rifles up until that point have been Germans. So they contract, and there's 200 get made out of Hanover, and of which they're the Hanoverian versions of the 1776 rifle. And it's very much a Jaeger rifle, and Jaeger being, a hunter by definition, but the term used to describe Germanic light troops. So they come up with this design, and when you look at it, it's very German looking. It has European looks to it. It's a short rifle, no bayonet. So they go about 200, and then the production switches to a very, it's like an anglicized version of that rifle. So the stock gets shaped more like a British military arm at the time. They call it the handrail, which is the thin part where your cheek goes, and it's got that very pronounced.
That was one of my questions. What the heck is that?
It's a handrail?
Yeah, I didn't. It's
a handrail stock.
That's if you look at the comb, I guess it is. It sticks out.
I guess yes, and it's just the way that it's shaped. The wood is shaped so that it kind of it juts up, and as you get closer to the small or the wrist of the stock, it narrows quite considerably from the butt plate. So as it comes at the top of the stock, has this very narrowing triangular kind of cross section when you look at it from above, and when you look at it from the side, as the wrist slopes down from where the lock in the back of the barrel is, the breech area, then it'll abruptly turn up and be flat and straight out to the butt plate. So that's the sort of, I don't know if it's a collector term. It might be, but it's certainly used in reference material to describe the kind of stock that it has. But it's just the way that the British made arms. That's all.
What rest? I'm trying to think what part of your body is even touching that. Is your
cheek.
wrist?
No, your cheek.
Oh, so your face is in there. All right.
Yeah, if you look at a picture, if you've got you're obviously on a computer, but if you look at it, just Google Brown Bess or whatever, and you'll look at the stock up close, you'll see what I mean. And that style of stock, it ends with the India pattern, because after the India pattern, which gets used all the way to the 1840s, they transition, and the Newland pattern Brown Bess or Newland pattern musket is not widely. It's intended that they're going to go to that as far as the general issue arm, but they never do, because it's introduced in like 1804 or something. I'd have to look at the exact date.
1802.
But it's so they're in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars. The peninsula hasn't kicked off yet, but there's just no capacity to transition into this. So they figure that the Newland pattern muskets are issued to the guards only, which are a small selection of the army. And the India pattern that's used throughout the Napoleonic Wars, at Waterloo, after Waterloo, all the way in the 20s and 30s, right up into the early 40s, when they're finally replaced by percussion muskets. So that style of stock, as you say, the handrail style, like on the India pattern, goes all the way through. But then the Newland pattern, right, they change it and they simplify it, and it's more of a rounded, like what you look at an Enfield rifle musket, that kind of stock.
But 9 out of 10 times, if someone says, "Hey, look at this Brown Bess," it's going to be some sort of long land pattern.
No, well,
or something that was updated.
Depends, because like coming in the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War in North America, most of that's long land pattern, which are 46-inch barrels, 44-inch, something like that. They're big, long things. By the time of the Revolution, generally speaking, you could generally assume that long land patterns are being carried by the grenadiers of the infantry only. And by that point, the short land pattern has become the general issued arm. And literally, it's the same musket with a shorter barrel. I say the same. It's just functionally, it's completely the same. And that's the standard arm until the 1790s. And then they realized that they can't fight the Napoleonic Wars, which kick off in 993? Because they can't. They're raising battalions in the army left, right, and center, and they need a simpler arm to manufacture. So they basically take the musket that was being issued and built for and issued to the East India Company armies in India, which is a simpler version and slightly shorter, and they take that.
And that's yours is too, right? Yours is that.
Yeah, that's an India pattern. So they buy them right off the East India Company, because it runs India, but it's like it's everything. It's the government, it's the army, it's by that point, by the middle of the 19th century, it doesn't have anything to do with trade and commerce. It's just running the country, and that's the way the British did things all over the place. The Hudson's Bay Company, right, which is a famous Canadian department store now, was the same sort of idea. They'd set up these companies that would basically administer parts of the world, parts of the empire. Anyway, that's a side story. And
it worked a long time.
Right. It's just sort of the way they did things. The government buys East India weapons right at the beginning, and then they're like, we can't keep doing this. We just got to make more. And so they divert their production into this more simple musket. And by simple, I just mean like instead of 4 ramrod pipes, there's 3. There's less of it. And I guess the finishing, the way that they're finished is a bit sort of not deficient, but of less quality. Functionally, they're basically they're identical. And that's what gets used right through by the time of the
which is
sharp.
That's weird too, because you're talking like 80 years and it's still identical. Like the action is still the same.
There's all flintlock, right? And the flintlocks have been
Yeah.
around since the beginning of the 1700s,
Yeah.
and even before that, really, in terms of
Crazy.
the early times. But the long land pattern gets sort of finely patterned as the long land pattern, and I'm thinking the 20s, 30s, or something like that. When it's finally, before that, there's a few other patterns that are floating around that the army is using, but the system was just completely different to what you'd expect today. And it's with the long land pattern that things are sort of gripped to the point where, look, there's one pattern of arm that we use. This is it. And in the early 1700s, you're still getting a lot of variation, that different units will have different types and different calibers and all this kind of business.
Right.
So it's an evolutionary process. So, but that how do we get onto this? It was the carbines, and that there's no Brown Bess carbine, right? There's light cavalry carbines and there's heavy cavalry carbines. Light cavalry carbines are typically, they're lighter, they're smaller caliber, like 62 cal, and then the heavy cavalry carbines are
62.
they're heavier in terms of their construction. There's a couple of different ones out there. Paget, there's one that's really tiny and short, like almost ridiculous, almost like a big pistol. So cavalry carbines are just not at all a thing. They're all there. They all have them. The cavalry all have carbines, but they're just not intended to use other than like being a sentry and firing a round off to wake everyone up if the enemy attacks, kind of thing. Like, they're just not used, and a lot of them are not that capable either in terms of their performance. So you can't really classify. There's no such thing as a Brown Bess cavalry carbine. So if that's what Wikipedia is saying, then Wikipedia is being Wikipedia.
Wikipedia is never wrong, so we'll have to
Wikipedia,
agree to disagree.
Wikipedia is great if the reference is there.
True, and they do have references. It helps.
So I don't know what they're referencing when it comes to a Brown Bess cavalry carbine, but it's interesting to look at that.
Maybe I'll quote this podcast and use it as a reference. Update Wikipedia.
Because some Canadian idiot said there wasn't.
This guy says no. No, as a reference. Put a note. We'll see.
Hey, a reference is a reference.
I'm just looking for my book here. I think it's downstairs, which would have the Coles Notes version of everything in it. But yeah, there's like, as Brown Bess is not even, it's a colloquialism, right? It's not the name of the arm. The name of the arm is the India pattern musket, or the long land pattern musket. So it's something was a nickname that's become sort of the way they're referred to as in the modern context. So that because the term Brown Bess was actually used up until percussion. It was used for percussion muskets.
Well, I have 3 hypotheses of Brown Bess name. You tell me which one you're with.
Okay.
One says it was named for Elizabeth I, which doesn't have much support. The second says Bess derives from the word arquebus, which is a 15th century long gun, or blunderbuss.
Yeah.
And then the third, your pal Jonathan Ferguson, says it goes back to the 1760s and adopted from slang for a mistress, prostitute, or a lowly woman.
I'm totally with number 3.
So it was just used for that long, a Bessie, or whatever.
Yep.
Nothing to do with the list. All right. So they called them Brown Bess, I guess, back then also.
Right, but as a colloquialism, right?
As a colloquialism, right. But they wasn't like many years later looking back.
No. But I mean, as you say, there are period references to the term, but which get surprisingly, I think, few when you go back into the sort of real golden era. But when you read references from the 1850s and talking about, say, the Enfield, and they are comparing the Enfield to what was before it, which was the percussion musket. And they're referring to the percussion musket like in the days of Brown Bess. Right. So they're referring not just to the when someone says Brown Bess, you think of like Napoleonic flintlock musket, right? Or maybe you think of it in the American Revolution context. But I mean, those two were within sort of 50 years of each other, right? Or a bit less.
Right.
But that term actually gets used as that slang to describe a smoothbore infantry arm. When you get into the era of the rifle and the rifle musket, then you're looking back on, they used to use Brown Bess, and Brown Bess was only good for 150 yards, maybe 200 in certain circumstances. But now we're looking at something that can shoot 900. That's the kind of language that you can read from something that's written in the 1840s or 1850s. So the term was around for sure.
That's cool.
And Jonathan is a good pal, by the way.
Yep.
He's been very supportive of the channel over the years, and I had the opportunity to meet him when I was in the UK last, and he's just a prince of a man
and a wealth of knowledge.
Completely.
Did you answer this? If I saw a Brown Bess for sale, which one would it most likely be? Or they're all for sale? Or
I can actually
for sale.
I can speak to that because when I was after the P53 that I purchased way back in hour one of the conversation, then the next arm that I looked at was a Brown Bess, and I started looking at terms of how what's out there in terms of what's available, and at the time, an original wasn't necessarily something that was within my, purview or within my budget, if you want to call it that. And then at that point, it's like, where to look? I have no idea. But in, Googling stuff, you could come across examples, and, the Pedersoli Brown Bess is a Shortland reproduction. So it's perfectly and completely relevant for the American Revolution. But the Shortland is absolutely not relevant for anything Napoleonic. And by that, I mean like peninsular, sort of, 1809 to 1815, like Waterloo, the high Napoleonic era. So in making that decision, it was like, well, do I like Pedersoli? You can get Pedersolis anywhere. I say that with a bit of tongue in cheek, but it's a company that produces stuff, modern made things, and they're available. They're out there.
Yeah.
But I'd like something that's a bit more relevant to, say, Canada and the War of 1812, which is a completely, high Napoleonic era conflict, and has something relevant to. So, and besides, the whole, as I said, I read the Sharp books when I was a kid, and that interested me, the Peninsular War and that kind of thing. Not necessarily the rifles, although they're interesting unto their own right, but just the study of the military history. And so I want something that is a touchstone to that. So how do I get my hands on an India pattern? Because it doesn't appear Pedersoli makes an India pattern. And I ended up going back to the company that I found the Euro Arms P53 at, and they imported versions made in India. So it's an India pattern musket from India. But I went through a bit of a back and forth with them, because I know there is a some bad connotation when you mention that out there. But he assured me of what they do in the process they put these things through, and they not rebuild them, but they basically go over them. And they've sold, lots of them out there, and no issues, and they were a reputable company. And so I said, okay. And I bought one of them from them, and sort of was as happy as I could be. It functioned just fine. The lock everything was very, very stout and well built. The only thing I had to say about it is it was made with a piece of wood that was half heartwood and half sapwood, and it's some weird different wood from that part of the world. It's not made out of walnut. So it got a kind of a different texture to it, but it was weird because, when you look at it from one side, we're talking about blonde, wood on rifles. So on one side, it was very light, and the grain was very loose, or very not very dense. And then when you looked on the other side, it was dark and it had a very tight grain. So it was just the weirdest. And I was trying to figure out what the hell's going on until I sort of looked at it from one end, and you can see where it's half sapwood, half heartwood. And I was like, if it all been like heartwood, nice dark, dense grain,
Yeah.
that would have been perfect. But the piece that it was made with was this, and so I just, was like, it is what it is. And I had that for quite a while until well into the channel era, when I just decided that wouldn't it be nice if I could come across an original, and which I ended up doing, and that's the one that's featured on the channel. So that was the second one I came by, and that is in my mind, a great way to answer your question, is because I actually did make that choice based on the history and based on what I wanted, and found a solution to it.
It's so weird. You're like an anomaly that you're into the history so much, but you don't care about all the collecting side of it. It's weird to be a shooter and into the history. I don't know. A lot of the history guys I know don't even shoot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They collect.
See, I can't even imagine that, quite frankly, because to me, it's the history of its use. It's not a history of. It's not this like the book history of the arm. It's not the book that the arm is, in the sense of its markings and it's this. Like, I know what the history of the Brown Bess is. I mean, as much as I do, and that's interesting to me. Got it. But it's not about this rifle or this musket was in this part of the world. It was used by this unit. It's like, because quite frankly, I don't think there's a soldier out there who looks at his rifle or his musket at the time and goes, boy, I wonder who made this. I wonder what this marking means. They don't know. No, they get given this thing. They get trained how to use it. They get good at using it, and then they use it. And then, life goes on, or, whatever happens. But that's the outlook of that. It's just a tool. Like, when's the last time you looked at whether your hammer is made by Stanley or made by some other company?
Right.
Like, I mean, maybe you have a preference, or you like DeWalt power tools instead of, I don't know, Bosch or something. But like, it just doesn't happen. You get given the arm you're given and you use it. And do you think that they really cared between, people talk about in the flintlock musket realm of like, what's better, the Charleville or the Brown Bess? And okay, ballistically, is there something to say for that? Because the Charleville's a bit smaller caliber, or this back and the other, they're flintlock muskets. They're all used exactly the same way, and they all have the same capability when it comes to the battlefield. So, do I like the look of a Brown Bess or an India pattern musket versus the Charleville? Yes, I prefer the Brown Bess. I think the Charleville and the Springfield derivatives are like there's something about them I don't like. They're just an aesthetic thing for me. And it's got nothing to do with being French, or in the case of the Springfield copies, the American. It's just the way they look. I don't like the way the pieces go together, and I don't like that end cap they have. But that's just me. So I'll be more than happy to accept the label anomaly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Unique guest. How about that?
Unique.
Okay.
Speaking of unique, the Baker and Brunswick rifles are two rifles I've run across on your site that, in my world, no one asks any questions about. None of my friends or anything, because they have no idea probably what they are. But
well, I'm surprised on that the Baker isn't there, because the Baker's just got.
I guess because nobody has one, so they're not even asking questions about them. Like,
right.
What does this mean, or what does that mean?
Because probably the one thing that I would say the community who are at all interested is asking for is a readily available rifled Baker, proper rifle, because Bakers, I think, are either one, if for an enthusiast, which I would classify myself as, and who go that distance to find one and have one properly, either make it yourself or have it made or something along those lines, so it's rifled. Or you're a reenactor and you reenact the 95th Rifles, in which case your pastime doesn't involve shooting, in the sense that when you reenact, you don't shoot because there's other people that you're pointing things at. So you're not actually shooting them. You shoot blanks out of them. Great. But do you need rifling to shoot blanks? Absolutely not. So all the Baker rifles that are out there, I shouldn't say all, the vast majority come out of made in India. They're imported into various countries in the West, and they're made or brought to a state where they can shoot a blank. You just pour powder down the barrel, put some powder in the pan, and fire it. And it makes a bang. Because in a reenactment, that's all you need.
Yeah, that's cool though in its own way.
Right. And only the real true enthusiast is going to make the extra effort, because up until now, or up until in a short period of time from now, the only way to get your hands on one is to either go the route that I did, which is get parts out of the rifle shop in Oklahoma and the barrels that they provide for that kit, and they can make them for you in about 5 years, or you can get a kit from them and make it yourself, or you can get a kit from them and have someone else make it. But there's no sort of factory production anywhere. And my first Baker was an Indian one that I had rebarreled right away, and got many hours and many rounds of enjoyment out of it. And then I just decided I wanted something a bit better, and so I went with the rifle shop version. That's the one I have today. But Pedersoli, which is the company I mentioned that makes the Shortland pattern. I don't know if you're familiar with Pedersoli. They're the most prolific Italian gun makers out there, I think, in the sort of the hobby world. And
we get them in Uberti.
Uberti, yeah, for sure, and especially in the handgun side. A lot of old guns of the Old West and that kind of stuff they make, and some, very more niche ones as well. And quite frankly, I'm surprised it's taken them this long, but they announced at SHOT Show this year that, and this is the first sort of public announcement, they didn't have an example to show, but they are bringing a rifled Baker to market. Who knows how much it's going to be?
Ooh.
They've patterned it off the what's commonly called the 1805 pattern Baker rifle, which is sort of, it's a little bit simplified over the previous pattern in terms of the brass work. The furniture is a bit simplified and that kind of thing. So, I mean, for the community that's interested in Baker rifles, this is like, now the angels are about to start singing and the clouds are about to start breaking.
They heard them and made it for them.
Well, exactly. It's taken a lot. I mean, these conversations, I've talked to people that have been pestering Pedersoli for 10 years. Can't you make a Baker rifle? The market, that a Baker rifle that will be out there for one of these things, with Sharp that's out there, with like all this interest, that if you could bring one that just off the shelf, it's rifled, you can load it and fire it, just like any of the other Pedersoli arms that are out there, then you're sitting on a gold mine. And so anyway, apparently it's coming next end of this year. So that's exciting news for anybody who's looking for a rifled Baker, for sure. But now the Brunswick, that's a completely different story. On the rifle shop topic, apparently they do offer one, but I've never seen one or heard of anybody going that route and making their own in the same way I made the Baker.
Oh, really?
But the Brunswick has an interesting history itself, and I've only recently come into that. It's had that gap in the collection filled. A bit of an interesting roundabout story, but I am now the owner of one, a second pattern one, and it has a completely, you want to talk about weird stuff, it's got a round ball with a belt around it. Looks like Saturn.
Yeah, and the barrel's grooved right for the belt.
Yeah, well, it's got two grooves, just two big, deep grooves. It's a faster twist than a Baker. Baker's got a 1 in 120 inch twist, which is super slow. And the Brunswick is about half that. And it's just a very interesting rifle to research, to learn about. Since I've had cause to know generally about this stuff, I've known about the Brunswick, but I've only had one in my hands recently, and therefore getting a bit deeper into its history, its service history, its ammunition, that kind of stuff. So I've got a fairly decent grip on it now.
Well, I heard that the cons of it was a little difficult to jam the round down, and it got worse with fouling very quickly. And then they also said the round was heavy and slow.
Yeah, it's like a musket caliber. It's like 702. Wait, 702. And the Baker was nominally anyway 62, which is a typical carbine caliber. So it was Lovell was the fellow that was instrumental in the sort of bringing the small arms of the 30s and 40s to bear, and he kind of not standardized, but he made an impact across the entire sort of gamut of British small arms in basically, let's call it the percussion era.
Right.
And one of his decisions was to try and generalize on the caliber, so that ammunition provision would be easier in the case of it being on a campaign. So, could you use a 69 caliber round ball in a Brunswick? Technically, you can, but you couldn't in a Baker, right? But because the percussion muskets of the era, the 39 or the 42 pattern, they had the same caliber as a Brown Bess flintlock, like a India pattern flintlock. So we used the same ball. Powder was getting better, so the mounts were dropping. From down to 4.5 drams from 6.5 drams, which is like 160 grains, 140 grains. It's a pretty stout charge no matter what way you look at it. But when you look at the charges of, say, the American Revolution compared to what they were in the 1840s, it's like half the powder.
Wow.
Maybe not half, maybe a bit less, a bit more than half, but significantly less. So the Brunswick is part of that. It comes out of Lovell, and is actually the full name of the Brunswick is something like Lovell's Improved Pattern Brunswick Rifle or something like that. And it is, as a result of trials, it's sort of there is a sense of the good idea fairy coming to play in this. I've shot my Brunswick quite a bit, but not to the point where I'm completely satisfied in working it up and whatnot. I've had to go through a few different ball molds, which I haven't delved with on the channel, but I will.
That's an interesting one. So
it's like the profile of the bullet and the profile of the rifling. Interestingly enough, on the subject of the Brunswick, probably the best reference to it isn't even British. It's Indian, and specifically the East India Company. And there's a fellow by the name of David Harding who wrote a series of books on the weapons or the arms of the East India Company. And it is, I mean, how do I put this? It's unbelievable in the detail. And it's very dense. It's a very academic book, but the stuff he pulled out of the archives in India and put into these 4 volumes, I've only got the 2, which are the most important 2 of the set.
Were they using a lot of different things from all around, or
no? It was just
the British.
It was basically British stuff. And all the arms are made in Britain, but they're made for the East India Company for the arming of the 3 armies that were present in India. Each presidency part of India had its own army that was completely separate from the other ones, but all governed by the East India Company. It's a weird system.
That's weird.
Well, you've got like the army of Madras, of Bengal, and Bombay, and there's 3 different armies. They dress similarly, but not exactly the same. They use the same weapons, but it's sometimes like the Brunswick ammunition for one is different from the Brunswick ammunition from another. And anyway, that kind of detail is found in these books. And so I'm finding that far and away the best reference for the Brunswick isn't even to the Brunswick. It's just to the 2-groove rifle in East India Company service. And he's got information there about the British and their use of the Brunswick, because they send, at the time, rifle regiments were not, they were quite rare amongst units in the army. They were a very select few. And one of them was sent to India, and they dealt closely with some of the forces of the East India Company in getting these rifles sort of to shoot the way they were intended to. It's a very interesting and detailed story. And Harding is the fellow that sort of takes the credit, or should and does take the credit for bringing all this information to bear. It's a shame that the books are out of print, and the ones that are out there are like unobtainium. They're so expensive.
$1,000, yeah.
Yeah, but I fell into the 2 from a friend who had found 2, bought them, and then found a full set. And so felt that the two which arguably, which I agree with, are the most important of the two. One is the
it's kind of weird to think that that might be the only records of all of these
of this kind of
activities.
stuff. Yeah, I mean,
You know?
there's it's incredible. Like there's chapters and chapters and chapters on accuracy and performance and the capabilities in the hands of troops in terms of firing experiments and like stuff that you'll never find in that kind of detail anywhere else in the West.
So
Like,
why didn't this catch on? This
I couldn't
belted
tell you.
barrel ball and all that.
Well, I mean, it did to a degree in the sense that it was used up until the 1850s, right? And the rifle existed as a parallel arm to the musket from its inception. If we take out the 1776 thing, which came and went for the American Revolution, the rifle doesn't re-enter service until 1800 with the establishment of in the British context, with the establishment of the Experimental Corps of Riflemen, which then, once the experiment has been ratified enough, gets turned in to the 95th Rifles, which is the first rifle unit in the British Army. And then that, along with two picked regiments in the Army, the three units go to a special camp and they all get trained up to be light infantrymen. So that's another story all to itself with Sir John Moore. And that becomes the nucleus of the British Light Infantry Arm, which by the end of the Napoleonic Wars has something like, I don't know, a dozen regiments. Maybe I'm overemphasizing, but like it turns into a huge part of their army. And actually, but that relationship with the rifles and what they call the line, the standard infantry, that is maintained all the way up until the issue of the rifle musket in the 1850s. So you've got the line infantry, or the infantry of the line, who have muskets, and you have the rifles and the rifle corps as a way to describe the two regiments in the army which are armed with rifles. After the Napoleonic Wars, the 95th gets pulled out of the line and ceases to be numbered in seniority and becomes what's known as the Rifle Brigade. And that's the name of the regiment. And cool the 60th, which is actually a funny unit that's got many battalions, and many of which are German. And like the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th wear red, like the rest of the army, but the 5th and 6th battalions wear green, like the rifles do, and they are armed with the rifle. And those two units, the 95th and the 60th, basically go through the Napoleonic Wars as the sole rifle-armed troops within the army. The 60th get renamed into the King's Royal Rifle Corps, which is a regiment, just like the Rifle Brigade is also a regiment. So
great names.
Yeah, I know it's the one thing that the British can do is name their units in a confusing way. But once you know the system, once you can understand it, then it's not an issue anymore. So those two units are the only two rifle armed units, with some minor exceptions, all the way right through until the 1850s. So the Brunswick comes into service in about 1840-ish. And lasts until the sort of early 1850s. So it's not around for that long when you compare it to the Baker, which is in service from the 1800 to the 1840s, basically, in a number of different patterns.
Right.
But as a sort of that paradigm that I was referring to, that ratio of rifles to muskets within the army, basically doesn't change. When the rifle musket does come in, then of course they first of all they trial the P.51, which is a sort of musket bore rifle musket, big 704, 702 caliber, with a great big huge expanding ball in it. Thing weighs like 800 grains, 600 some odd grains. It's a massive bullet. It's like the size of your big toe, and that's brought in an experimental way. And used for the first time in South Africa in the campaigns against the various tribes in South Africa. And then it's issued sort of at like 100 per battalion in various parts of the army as a sort of putting their toe into the world of the rifle musket. We don't want to commit completely, but we want to get some more fidelity on whether this is the way forward, which it probably is, but we're just not going to go full on. And then the Crimean War happens. And they realize that, you know what, we really need to do this full on. So they withdraw all these rifles from across the army, and they put them all in the Rifle of the East, or in the Army of the East, which is the army they send to the Crimea to fight the Russians. And so that out of 5 divisions, 4 of them have rifle muskets. 1 still has percussion muskets. And that's really the first time in the British context that the rifle becomes the arm of every man. And so everybody, when you talk about the Thin Red Line, the 93rd Highlanders at Balaclava, they're all armed with the P-51 rifle musket. Everyone has a rifle. And so when they first engage the Russian cavalry as they're bearing down on them from the heights towards Balaclava, they engage them at 600 yards, which up until that point is something that's completely unheard of. For a battalion to engage in the open like that at 600 yards en masse is something like paradigm shifting for sure.
So that the pattern 1853 was then a
and
star.
The 1850s, that was the 1851.
Oh, the big one,
which was a completely different arm. And it's the sort of the last of the Lovell era mentality. So big bore, but definitely a rifle musket, expanding ball. It's got a Minier style expanding bullet in it. But almost parallel. I mean, that's a P-51 versus the P-53. So very shortly after that, they start working on something a little bit more efficient. And that efficiency comes in the form of a smaller bore, right? So that's where the 5.77 caliber comes from. So it's small bore in relation to the 51, which is 702, 704, one of those two.
Yeah, 702. That's giant.
Yeah. And then the P-53 Enfield first gets issued in the Crimea in the spring of 1855. That's the first time it sees service. So it's interesting that these dates never refer to when the thing actually gets put in the hands of the men ever.
No, of course not.
At any time. It's when the sort of it's rubber stamped as being, this is the pattern we're using. This is what we're going with. But it's always many years after the fact that they actually get into the hands. And then sometimes many years after that before they actually get used, like on a campaign, in a battle kind of thing. So the Brunswick, it fills this really interesting niche between sort of the known, the Baker, and it's this kind of deviation of this funny rifling and the even funnier bullet. And it's used right up in parallel with the percussion musket up until when it's replaced in the 1850s. And the 2 rifle brigade battalions that go to the Crimea get re-equipped with the P-51. And then generally, as the mid-50s march on, then the Brunswick percussion muskets and the P-51 get generally replaced. The P-51 only serves in the Crimea, basically. It doesn't go across the army. It's only in the Crimea because the P-53 is on its way, and that becomes the first really, truly universally issued rifle across the army. So anyway, that's a bit of a sidebar on the history of the rifle in the British service, but that's the way it all sort of fits together.
Can I have that as a whole nother episode?
Yeah, but I'm really the Brunswick is something I'm excited to get stuck into. As I say, I've gone had to make some adjustments to the bullet design to make it a little bit easier to load. But
there's a rumor that the Nepalese Brunswicks exist and that they're horrible and you should avoid them. Is
basically
that true?
Yeah, they're made there in Nepal. They are 2-groove rifles, but they are not Brunswicks, if that makes sense. So the Brunswick rifle is particularly...
They're like the Chinese copies of things where they're...
You could say that.
Theory.
When you look down the barrel of a Nepalese Brunswick, the barrel can... usually rifling is pretty regular. Like the curve is smooth and it twists. You can see that when you look down the barrel. Sometimes of a Nepalese 2-groove rifle, it's straight for a while, and then it twists fast, and then it twists slow, and then it's straight again.
No.
Yeah, it's rough inside. It looks like it's been like cut with a chisel. So they are what they are, but not necessarily of the best quality. And
right.
in my hunt for a Brunswick, they were never ever considered. That's just me.
That bad.
That's just
Probably
me.
would do the same.
I was always looking for an ordnance pattern Brunswick, and I now have one. So
we answered our Snider-Enfield questions before on all the things we talked about, except there's one here. Is the Roman numeral stamped? This is someone, my friend asked me. Is the Roman numeral that's stamped in front of the breech the mark number?
Are you talking about Snider?
On a Snider.
Yeah. It'll be a 2 or a 2 1-star, 2-star, or a 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
so that'll be on the breech in front of the shoe. For a Snider, the shoe is like, there's the breech block, which is the piece that flops open and closed.
Right.
And that fits into what they call the shoe. Just imagine like a wooden clog. That's where you put your foot in.
Oh, okay.
When the breech is open, you're looking down at it. It's kind of got that hollow. Anyway, that's what it's called. It's called the shoe. And yes, that is the mark. So, for instance, the 2 that I have, well, the 3 that I have, I've got a rifle. Like the long Snider, the short Snider, and a Snider cavalry carbine. So the long rifle is a Mark III, which has a catch on the breech handle, among other minor changes. And my short rifle is a Mark II 2-star, as is the cavalry carbine. Or now that I think about it, is it a 1-star? Anyway,
so many stars.
Well, if it's not enough to change, like it's like, oh, you know what? We found that this extension on the thing, it's catching on uniforms. This piece on the rifle that's extended out here. So you know what we're going to do? Okay, we're going to round that off a little bit so it doesn't catch on uniforms quite so much. And we've also found that the ramrod needs a bit of a different shape to it. So what that would entail is 2 changes that go into a star, because the fundamental nature of the weapon hasn't changed.
Right. I'm trying to think of other countries that mark their changes as such.
Here,
I don't know if anyone else did.
My favorite, not with marks and stars, but when presented with the argument that it's so confusing, I'll put it to you this way. Do you know the tank that's used in the movie Fury?
Yeah.
All right. Do you know what kind of tank that is? It's a what, sorry?
The like M4A8 or something like that.
M4. Yeah. And E8.
E8.
I thought there was another one in there.
Yeah, I know there's like an E8, A3 or something like that.
Right. So, in terms of confusing ways of determining what things are, I would say I would move that system is maybe even more confusing. Not to say that it's some sort of.
What do you mean? There's nothing. There's no other M1s. There's only one M1.
Well, there's an M1.
Okay, if you're talking about the rifle, but in terms of the designating of different types.
No, there's not even one rifle. You got the M1 carbine, the M1 Garand. So
then we have.
It would be nice to have different names but like model.
What about a Springfield?
What do they have?
Is it just a 1903 Springfield?
1903 Mark 1, 1903 A1, 1903 A3.
Oh yeah.
A4.
Okay. Oh. You mean there's different types of Springfields?
Yeah.
Nope, all the same.
What? And they have different names?
That's true. All right, but no one does these stars.
Man, I hate when arguments fall apart like a paper bag.
No one marks it and stars it though.
No, nobody. It's just,
no one puts the whole thing on the stock like that.
A star simply refers to a small change that's made incrementally.
But then I'm thinking no countries are making incremental changes, really.
Well, tell me what the difference between a Springfield A1 and an A3 is.
Well, that one has that was simplified because of the war that went down. The
Yeah.
things you were talking about were improvements.
Okay, well, let's look at
A3,
an SMLE Mark III.
Yeah, those are simplified. Come on, Tom.
And what happens in an SMLE Mark III Star?
Yeah, those get it. The SMLE, Britain's the only one doing it.
Right, but you said you made amendments to go down in complexity, right?
Oh,
well, that's precise. That's no. Well,
they did go down also, too.
Right. I guess my point is that
True.
every country
side.
makes modifications to their rifle, and they use different systems to delineate that.
I'm surprised Germany didn't have some super complex system for that.
They probably did, but they didn't bother with it.
They didn't mark it on anything.
It was what they didn't do. They started stamping and they started serializing less. So that was their way.
I'm surprised it's not like a K98 VZ 2.4.6 or whatever.
Right, Mark II.
So when you look at, say, the SMLE Mark III, right, that's the rifle that goes to war in 1914. And in 1916, they figure it's like, wait a minute, there's a lot of stuff we don't need on this. And they switch production. They just simply eliminate the addition of some of the parts. And that becomes a Mark III Star. And they take out, they eliminate, or they leave out, in as much as they don't purposely install things like the adjustable windage rear sight, things like the magazine cutoff. They leave some of these things out. Now, some Mark III Stars will have those elements in them, but they'll have one of the list of changes that are made to that rifle as part of the Star. They'll have one of them there. So it's just a production thing. So that it's not a fundamental change in the rifle. It's a change in some of the details.
Right.
Like the Mark II Snider is different from a Mark III Snider, as an example. There is a fundamental change there. Now, outwardly, it doesn't look that way. But the barrel on a Mark III Snider is made of steel. The barrel on a Mark II Snider is made of iron.
Wow.
That's pretty important.
That's a big difference.
So that was deemed worthy enough for a different mark.
Now that I'll give you a mark for.
But then, interestingly enough, in the P53 world, there's four different. Now this is not contentious. It is in some circles. What do you call the subtypes? It's a pattern 1853, but then there's four different versions of it. Are those types or are those models? And that's something that like collectors argue about from time to time. Suffice it to say, the changes from let's just use the word type, from type to type, are just done as a manufacturing change. It's not like they're all withdrawn from service and the new ones are issued. It's like you use this one till it gets worn out, and then when it gets replaced, it gets replaced with whatever's being made now. So there's four different versions, but none of them are ever specifically alluded to as a different, like a star. So the star system really comes in when the Snider comes in, and that's the first time you see the term mark in relation to a firearm or military arm, is when the Snider enters service.
Wow, that's so tradition. They kept doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and but it's just a different way of saying a something or other. Like the M4, right. M4A1. Right? Is there an M4A2? I think there is. So why is that any different from saying an M4 Mark 1 or M4 Mark 2? It's not really. It's just a different way. It's just a different way of saying it. That's all.
I guess when there's multiple stars, then I start. It's like hard to keep up. I'm not complaining about their system as much as shit. This is a Mark III 3-star or whatever the Rosses are. Mark II.
The way that you're going to be able to figure that out, really, the best reference for that is the list of changes, which is it's a document that's been what's the word? Not paraphrased, but reproduced by Ian Skennerton, who's a prolific author on.
Yeah, I have his book, so it's probably in there.
Well, it's a 6-volume series.
Oh, maybe not.
And basically, he went through, because the list of changes is like one great massive document, and it details every change to British ordnance there is. So not just rifles, but like a list of changes, the introduction of different types of equipment, a new sword comes into issue, and there's a list of changes entry for it, and so you can trace the evolution of some of these things. The list of changes is started in 1859, I think, and it goes all the way through until the 20s or 30s. At which point, he either ceased production of it, or it became such an unwieldy way of tracking this stuff because of the way the military is and all the different things, that it became sort of obsolescent. But for researching anything Victorian, researching anything Edwardian, Great War, when you talk about the introduction of like the Enfield revolver, Mark I. So there's a list of changes entry when it gets adopted, and it's in the book, and you can read it, and then it'll give a brief description of it. Maybe there's an engraving, a picture, and it'll give like a data sheet about the caliber and the weight and the length of it, and if there's something peculiar about it or in terms of how it's used. When they introduce a new set of rifle or infantry equipment, it's in the list of changes, and it'll have pictures and diagrams of the size of the pouches and the belt and the buckles and the this, that, and the other thing. I'm trying to think of anything. As I said, swords and lances.
Probably
that's all in there.
All the ammunition,
And all
303
the
changes, marks.
All of the ammunition and all the changes to it, and the introductions of, and Skennerton, the ones that are out there, he's curated. Yeah. So he doesn't have every single entry because the list of changes includes non-weapons references. If there's a new anvil introduced for, army artificers, it's in the list of changes. But we don't need to know that there's a new anvil in the service in 1875 because it has nothing to do with arms. So Skennerton has curated it just to relate to arms.
Oh, wow.
So for anything to do with Victorian British stuff, it's definitely a go-to reference. And it's just, I don't have them handy right here, but they're a little sort of, 8x5 book, 8 inches by 5 inches. And they're sort of, the dust jacket is kind of yellowy. And they're just,
it's nice that you have all this info available, because you hear about some countries that things were destroyed at the end, like Japan.
Yeah, for sure.
Factories are destroyed and they lose everything. Just simple production numbers is nice to have.
Yeah. And this isn't necessarily things like production numbers, but it'll have the introduction of the Mark I magazine rifle, which becomes later the Mark I magazine Lee-Metford, as an example. And it's got it in 1888. It's got a list of changes number, like the number of the entry onto the list. Let me think now. The magazine Lee-Metford was issued, it was issued with a spare magazine and a magazine pouch for that spare magazine. So it's got all that listed in the entry that says the introduction of the rifle. And then like a year later or a year later, it says, and the spare magazine, it has been determined that the spare magazines are to be withdrawn and no longer required in service. And there's an entry of list of changes because that's a change, right? So they pulled the spare magazine out of service. And then like 2 more entries down, they removed the magazine pouch from service. And then it's got a brief description of what's to happen. Like they get turned into stores or whatever. But that's the kind of detail that the list of changes has. So it's a very powerful reference in anything ordnance related. And it goes right through the Great War. So the introduction of different hand grenades or the helmets and gas masks and all that stuff, it's all in the list of changes.
Wow. Did he digitize it? Like, did he put it
I don't think so. I don't think because the way that records are kept in Britain, it's weird. You'd think that something like that would just be public, for public consumption in the public record. And it is, but you can't reproduce them. It's just, they're still under copyright, which is weird. But you can go and, like, if you write out all this stuff, then you're free to reproduce what you have created based on the reference. So he had to go to Kew in Britain, to the archives, pull the list of changes and start reading them and say, I want this one, I want this one, I want this one, and just make note of it all. And then go home. He lives in Australia. Go home and publish it all into a book, which is what he's done. So I have a friend who's just made a research trip based on the Snider project he's working on, and he had to do the same thing. So he went to the archives in England, and you couldn't reproduce. He had whatever information he took, he had to like copy down himself to take away. It just kind of a weird system that way, but whatever, it's their system. But that's how this list of changes and Skennerton kind of got it done in the way he did. But you're going to talk about the Snider, all those different marks and stars. It's all detailed in the list of changes. What the change from Mark 1 to Mark 2 is, and then what the change from Mark 2 to Mark 2 star and Mark 2 2-star, and then what the difference in the Mark 3 is. Like because it's a change, right? It's a list of changes that are made. So change is a new rifle comes in, or a modification to a rifle, or a modification to a pouch, or a sword, whatever it is. It'll all have it listed there, and you can just look it up. There's a big index that you can look it up, like pouch, ammunition, 303, infantry, or something like that. And then it'll list about 4 different versions of it, and it'll all have their list of changes entry. You can go to that and look it up numerically and find it. And they changed the stud on the pouch because they found the old stud wasn't it, whatever it was.
Well, that's even more interesting if you have that piece and you're going, I wonder why this one has a stud and this one doesn't, and then you can see, oh wow, in 18 whatever, this is when they changed it.
It's completely that like that. It's as I say, it's a very powerful research tool for sure.
We kind of jumped ahead a little bit to the SMLE Bowl. Take a step back to what some would say is the most iconic rifle of the 19th century British Empire, the Martini-Henry.
Mm-hmm.
And if you disagree, then let us know what you think the most iconic one is. And
I think that it is certainly associated with that sort of coming into the high Victorian era, like the real you can't say high point because of did the empire expand and become greater in that context after the Martini? Arguably it did, but it certainly has got that. Like if you had to name one rifle from the British Empire, then it would be it, and then there would be a movie to go along with it, which is probably one of the reasons why it's in the consciousness of everyone who's even remotely interested in the topic.
To me, as an American, though, when you say British soldier, I think red coat with a Revolutionary War musket,
with a short land pattern musket,
with a short land pattern. Yep.
Right, because that's the context. But if your area of interest had anything to do with the British Empire in the Victorian era, chances are, I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm just saying that everyone has their own kind of where they come from and what direction they come at the question from. So for me personally, being Canadian, the Martini has a very exceptionally small role to play in our history. It is, and it does get issued in partially to select units and whatnot, but it's never the general issued rifle. So in that context, the Martini has nothing, to do with Canada really. But in the greater British Empire, it sure does. I mean, you can start listing off places that it served and was used.
The Zulu Wars was a big spot it was used, and I was reading about extraction problems in that particular war. And now some people were saying it was the ammunition's fault, but then other people said it was the gun. So is it
there was no either problem during the Zulu War. So that's somebody projecting reasons for the defeat at Islandwana. That's all that is, honestly. There was no issues. The issue with Martini ammunition stems from problems that were discovered during campaigning in the Sudan in very specific circumstances, in a very specific climate, and very specific environmental problems or environmental aspects.
They just expanded too much and got stuck? That was it?
No, what it was is the fact that they were being carried in leather bandoliers for extended periods of time. And what that did was it caused verdigris. Basically, it's not rust in the sense of iron oxide, but it's oxide on the brass.
Uh-huh.
And this was causing all forms, and it would, because they would sit in these leather loops on their bandoliers, because that's what the equipment they were given, and they were in the field for months and months, and they
Right,
would
so
this
those rifles
without
could be sitting there for so long on
without
their
being in
belt.
action, so they weren't being rotated through. They weren't. It's like something they were being used on a daily basis at all. And in the dust and in the weather that they were facing, and the time, what ended up happening was that the corrosion was building on the casings, and then that, as a result, when actually in action and found in cases where they needed to actually use their rifles and fight, that there were problems that stemming from that were found and were fairly significant nature. And there was like parliamentary inquiries about it. But so that's where the whole ammunition and Martini ammunition comes out of. It's because of this I don't say crisis, but these issues that are discovered because of very specific things and very specific aspects of that nature of that campaign. And they're important enough that, as they say, there's a parliamentary inquiry about it. And then immediately they move, as a possible solution to this, they move to a drawn brass case instead of the foil cases. But that even that doesn't completely replace the foil cased ammunition that's used. So it's used in it's like a special service ammunition only. So shoot, let's get this done, start making this ammunition and get it out to the Sudan, because we don't know how long this war is going to last. They could be out there for another few years. In terms of the army could be still campaigning in the Sudan for a while. So let's get this ammunition out to them, because it's going to help a great deal in preventing some of the issues that were discovered with the more conventionally made Martini ammunition, which of course is that a brass foil and case. So, my answer to the defeat and the Zulu War question is that you say that not you, but the argument goes is that Islandowana was lost because of issues with jamming rifles and ammunition problems, not supplied as. Oh, that's another argument all to itself, which is not the case either. But in terms of jamming, and so ammunition in the rifle and having problems, and the battle, it was one of the reasons the battle was lost. It's like, okay, what happened at Rorke's Drift, which is the same day. That was that night and into the next morning, right? And 100 guys, I'm using rough numbers here, fired 20,000 rounds in the case of an afternoon and an evening and an overnight.
I heard they held off thousands.
They did. There was like 7,000 Zulus attacked them. So if Islandowana was lost because of ammunition problems and jamming over numbers of troops there that were, many times that who were at Rorke's Drift, and there Rorke's Drift, 100 guys beat off 7,000 Zulus. If they had problems with their rifles, they would. How do you lose those? How are they different? And the answer to that is, like, why are the circumstances different? Why are the outcomes different? The answer to that is it has nothing to do with ammunition.
They didn't have the leather belt thing.
Well, it's a question. The point is that, one, they weren't using bandoliers, so they weren't being stored in a leather loop for months and months and months. They were stored in paper packets or loose in a bag pouch. That was the nature of the carrying of the ammunition at the time. Now, the mounted infantry had bandoliers and this kind of stuff, but the nature of the campaign wasn't like it was in the Sudan, where you were in the field for months. I mean, Islandowana happened only like days after the campaign began. So they weren't in the field that long in those really harsh, bad conditions like they were in the Sudan. The Sudan's like the moon in terms of dust and rock, and just you see the pictures of the place. It looks literally like the moon or like Mars.
Yeah, like Mars. Yeah,
it's crazy. Yeah. So that's an easy
the
answer.
Martini-Henry is good again.
He's good again. It was never bad.
Except maybe the Khyber Pass ones.
Okay, right. Those are the ones that are made in the Khyber Pass with a guy in his bare feet with a file in his hand. Yeah.
Yes. So
which quite frankly, the stuff they make in their bare feet with files is amazing. The fact that they can make stuff in the first place like that.
Oh yeah. And the reloaded ammo they make that looks sketchy.
Sketchy.
To say the least.
So anyway, that's the Martini-Henry. The best book for that is going to be Neil Aspenshaw's book for Queen and Empire. And it is a fantastic reference. And he has a whole chapter on ammunition, and not just the manufacture of it, but that issue that we're just talking about. And he pulls out all this primary source documentation from Parliament and all this business. And basically, you read it, it's like, it's not that it didn't happen. It's that it's very select circumstances. The context is very narrow. And what's happened, though, is that it has spread out by the internet, basically. And it's projected onto different situations. Like at Maywand, that's another defeat. And you look at the way the battle in Maywand in Afghanistan unfolded with the 66th Foot, the 66th Regiment, and they were wiped out at Maywand in essentially the same kind of time frame. The Second Afghan War happened from 79 to 80. So it's like the same time frame as the Zulu Wars. And they lost that battle not because of the rifle. Because of the way they had deployed and the way they were surrounded, and everything collapsed. And, in the days of single shot breech loaders, you can't just like run and then turn around and fire 5 rounds at the enemy and then run again and fire another 5 rounds at the enemy. Like, that takes time. And if you are being rapidly outflanked by somebody that you can see, 500 yards away that are sneaking around behind you, and there's still people to your front, you have a choice to make. You either have to move quickly, but when you stop, maybe you can fire around, and then you got to run again. So that's one of the issues I think that comes out of the Islandwana sort of experience and the examination of that. And the same thing you can say at Maywand as well, is the fact that the maneuver aspect of the battle causes a breakdown in the ability to fight. Because, when you start moving, then you can't service a breech loading rifle as fast as you can when you're standing still. Right? You've got a pouch full of rounds, and you're just thumbing rounds into the breech and firing, right? But now you've got to do that and run. And then when you stop and you turn around and deliver some fire, there's only a couple of rounds. Then you got to run again because the guys off to your flank, they're moving fast, and they're beating you right now. They're running they're winning the foot race, but I still have to fight off the guys in my front. So like, where's the bet? Like, what do I do? And not you as an individual, but you as a commander, you as a group. What do? You have to, and that's why the nature of both those battles is so interesting in my mind, is because it's not that the rifle fails. It's the circumstances on the battlefield, and where the enemy is, where the Afghans are, where the Zulus are, where do they come from? Right. They get around the flank, and when you look at the way that in both instances, the way that the troops are deployed, it's like in a massive arc based on the ground that they can see to their front. But then their flank is way in the open, and it gets exploited, and that's basically what happens in both circumstances. But it's got nothing to do with jamming rifles.
We're learning that the rifle is not the reason for winning the wars or losing the wars.
Or losing the wars. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's something to be said for that, isn't there?
Right. It's
like what
we're
rifle
proving it today.
What rifle ever won a war or lost it, for that matter?
Well, the Garand, obviously.
Right. Well, the 1911, it takes a lot of times. Depends who you talk to.
Right.
So I don't actually have a Martini-Henry yet. If I were going out to get just one, like just the most common or the standard model or whichever one of that, what would be the one you would suggest going for?
Well, if you're looking for the sort of the most available and the cheapest, I would probably be a Mark IV. Okay. Which is the last pattern, and it comes out of sort of the 1880s as it starts life as a brand new rifle, and that's it's called the Enfield Martini, and it's in a smaller caliber. It's a 402 caliber, not a 45 caliber. And it is their approach to trying to make ballistically a better rifle. But at the same time, then we're talking about 30 caliber starting to become something that's on the radar. And so the Enfield Martini gets developed and prototyped in and around the same time that the 303 round and eventually what becomes the Lee Metford is prototyped. So when presented with an incremental change, in the case of the Enfield Martini, a change from the Martini-Henry, which is 45 caliber, to a 402, or do we like go all in and make a fundamental change to 303 or 30 caliber and magazine fed? What do we go with? And when presented with it that way, they basically look, yeah, the Enfield Martini. Okay, stop that. Focus on the 303 and let's move forward on that direction. But now we've got all this stuff that we've made for the Enfield Martini, like receivers and stuff like that. So what do we do with all this? And initially, they rebarrel it back to 45 caliber and becomes one of the sub patterns of the Mark IV. And so it has a long lever on it. It's got a different shaped body, the receiver. It's got a different contour.
See, this is part of the confusion I'm talking about. They're going back and forth, back and forth.
Well, not really, because the Enfield Martini is never actually produced as a service rifle. So it's like experimental.
Yeah, I do hear about like the long lever versus a short lever.
Right. So the Mark IV is the long lever, and the Mark 1, 2, or 3 are short levers. And that's literally in the length of the lever that comes out behind the trigger guard. And
only the Mark IV is the long one?
That's right.
Wow. Okay. That's a good thing to know.
Aesthetically, they don't gravitate. They don't pull my lever. So if you ask me which one to get, but IMA, are you familiar with IMA?
Yes.
Yeah. So, they brought the Martini to the masses 100% with all those Martinis that came out of Nepal. They had like some Mark IIs and 3s in there, but I think majority of them, or a lot of them, were Mark IVs, which seem to have had a better go of it in storage. But the days of IMA having good examples in stock, or if they're not gone, they're very close to being gone because they're sold out. They've sold them all. But they're still out there in the market. So you might find that if you want something that's budget friendly, then maybe a Mark IV is where to sort of start looking. Because the Mark IIs and 3s could probably tend to be more of a collector's market, looking at various auction sites or websites that are around. So IMA might still sell all that stuff. It's just a question of what the quality is going to be like. But I think if you were to say one thing about acquiring a Martini with the best budget, the best bang for your buck, is probably going to be a Mark IV.
And what about a 303 conversion?
Well, then that's not a Martini-Henry. That's a Martini-Enfield.
True. But is that close enough to get the feel of a Martini-Henry and enjoy modern caliber 303?
Not for this guy. Because there's nothing like shooting, 45 caliber Martini ammunition.
Oh, that's what my pals say too.
85 grains of behind a big paper patched 460 grain slug. Just, I don't know, there's something about it.
And you're selling me.
And the other aspect to it is the loading of it and learning how to do that. And I know some people it kind of dissuades them from it's too complicated or something. It's not really that complicated. There is a learning curve, and to understand what it is you need, and what works the best in it. But once you arrive at that information, it's a question of then finding a mold that'll give you that bullet. I can point you in 2 seconds. I can tell you who can give you one, and he'll do the brass for you as well. And that's Martin at X-Ring Services.
Good.
Martin at X-Ring Services will sort you out with a bullet mold, with brass. He uses reformed Magtech 24 gauge shotgun brass, which is more than serviceable in any of your recreational martini needs. There's no need to spend $8 a pop at some Bertram or other commercially made brass. That his brass is completely serviceable and functional. It's all I use. And
Cool.
he where IMA brought, quite frankly, this is the way I see it, where IMA brought martinis to the masses, Martin brought the ability to shoot martinis to the masses.
Wow.
Because he at his company, and he like runs it out of his garage, but he has been sort of the go-to guy for I'm gonna say commercial because he's not like a full company, but he just sits there and pumps out. He cuts it and forms it, and he's so good at it that when you buy 25 cases from him, you're getting 25. If you try and make it yourself and learn,
Oh yeah,
you're going to burn through a bunch that are now garbage. And that's where it was like, yeah, learning how to do it, I could learn. Of course I could learn. But one, I'm supporting one, he's a friend, and two, he's, like I said, he's literally been responsible, because you can buy all the rifles you have. If you can't have ammunition for it, then you can't shoot them.
Right. That's a big problem. Some of these old ones is thinking, all right, now I have to get all these supplies. What if they're expensive? So that's
Right.
good to know, because, Buffalo Arms charges an arm and a leg sometimes.
Yeah. And so, Martin can set you up with the components. You need to source your own lead and stuff, right? And tin, in
Right.
terms of getting the right hardness. Service rounds were 1 in 12, 1 part tin, 12 parts lead, but 1 in 20 is more than acceptable. And that's what I use. So when you say, is there a difference between a 303 and a 45 caliber, like a Martini-Henry or a Martini-Enfield, which is separate and distinct from an Enfield Martini, if you picked up on that.
Right.
Is that, yeah, I mean, a Martini-Enfield is like shooting an SMLE. It's like, bang, it's 303.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It has the action to it and whatnot, which is, different and more Martini-Henry like, but it's a package that interests me. And it's also, yes, they were used in service, but they weren't used by the British in service, and Martini-Enfields are used in India. Because there was a policy up until just before the Great War that after the mutiny in the 1850s, they had a policy where they would arm. The mutiny was a big deal, right? Like, it's not studied a lot, and not a lot of people know about it, but in terms of the British Empire, it was one of those fundamental moments.
What year?
And 1857 to 1859.
Oh, the Indian Mutiny.
Indian
Okay.
Mutiny, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So, but after that, they were like, this can't happen again. So there was a lot of fundamental changes that were made to the system. The East India Company was out, and it was ruled right from like direct rule. And the army changed, but one of the policies they kept was not wanting to go down that road again. On the other side of the coin, as far as policy goes, they were saying that, and they had instituted this, that they would not arm Indian troops with the same generation of weapons that the British had. So they kept them deliberately one step behind, in the event that anything like the mutiny would ever happen again, that the Indian troops would not have the same capabilities. So what you see going through the later, since the mutiny, right up until the beginning of right before the Great War, is that when in the 1860s, when the British troops have Enfield rifle muskets, the Indian troops either still have their East India Company muskets, or they get given a smoothbore version of the P-53. When the British moved to Sniders, then the Indian troops get Enfields. When the British troops get Martinis, the Indian troops get Sniders.
Wow.
When the British bring the Lee Metford in 303 into play in the 1890s, Indian troops get Martinis. When the army goes to the Sudan in 1898 under Kitchener, when he reconquested the Sudan in the Battle of Omdurman, amongst others, the British troops there are armed with the Metford in 303. The next battalion, and the Sudanese and the Egyptian battalions on the same battlefield, and I say that they're friendlies, they're armed with Martinis. And that's the way the policy was up until right before the Great War, when they said, right, no need for this anymore.
Wow.
Everyone's going to get 303. And so that's where the Martini-Enfield comes into play, when as a way to get Indian troops into 303, because that's like for supply purposes and all that kind of stuff, but still have them one step below,
one step behind. Yeah.
right? And so that comes up. And there's some minor differences. The nose cap's different. The bayonet fits on differently. The bayonet fits on, instead of the socket bayonet and the elbow on the side, as it had traditionally been with a socket bayonet, it gets changed and the elbow comes off the bottom. So other minor differences as well. So for me, it just, a long-winded answer, but it just doesn't cut it for me. I wanted a Martini so I could shoot a Martini the way it was intended to be shot. And that's sort of the hill I died on.
So be it.
All right, we just got a couple more. We're going to rush through these here. I don't want to keep you here too long here.
Well, I think it's the other way around. So,
no.
You guys take all the time you need, and if we need to cut it short, I understand.
No, we have a couple more rifles here. The Lee-Metford, we've mentioned a few times, and one thing I saw was the front sights on the Metfords are sometimes offset like way to the left, and they said it was some sort of error. But do you?
So that's on.
What's that error about?
Right, the error was on the Mark I Lee-Enfield, was where that error was made, and the sights were offset on the Metford, but correctly. Yeah. So both the Mark I and the Mark II, they're significantly different rifles in terms of the way they look. Just for identification purposes, the Mark I Metford has finger grooves in the stock, and it's got a recess underneath the magazine cutoff knob, and the sling is mounted forward, like in front of the magazine and up the forestock, whereas the Mark II is what the rest of the family looks like. And it's got a 10-round magazine instead of the Mark I 8-round magazine. The sling's mounted on the butt and the middle and the middle barrel band. And it doesn't have the finger grooves. The stock profiles are slightly different. So when they institute the Lee-Enfield, which is the change in rifling, the rifle itself is no different from like a Mark II Star. A Mark II Star Lee-Metford is identical to a Mark I Lee-Enfield, except for the rifling. Like the outside of it is they're the same. So you, without looking down and looking at the stamp, you can't tell the difference. They both have safeties. They both have 10-round magazines. They both look exactly the same. It's only the rifling that's different.
Did they try to modify Metford's rifling at all, or was there no way that style was modifiable?
Yeah, it was. The modification was they went to square bottom grooves instead of Metford, which is like a polygonal rounded kind of thing. But interestingly enough, like it's not the rifling that was really the problem. It was the combination of the rifling and the cordite, because cordite burns very hot, and it was eroding the throat of the barrel.
Oh,
yeah. Then they only lived for like 6,000 rounds or something like that.
It wasn't much, but when the Lee-Metford was used, it came into service in the early 1890s and was used all the way through to the Boer War, because the Lee-Enfield really doesn't get into the hands of anybody, except, as we mentioned way long ago about the Canadians. It really doesn't get into the hands of anybody until the war starts. The Boer War starts, when they start needing extra rifles, and the army starts expanding, and they bring in volunteers and imperial troops and all this kind of stuff. The army that sails to South Africa is armed generally with the Lee-Metford. So the Lee-Metford has lasted for 10 years, because even if it only lasts 6,000 rounds, well, in peacetime, unless you're on a campaign, and even then, the ammunition expenditure is like 200 rounds a year. So you don't get to the burnout stage for a long time, right?
Right.
So, because one of the questions is, well, how did they not know this? Didn't they happen? How did they not know this? And yes, they did, because the Enfield starts production in 95. I believe it. Yeah, 95. So they found out, but there's a whole bunch of rifles, not only in the hands of troops, but in store, that have never been used. And in true British fashion, you use stuff until it's worn out. And so it takes a while for the Lee-Enfield to actually come into service. And there were formulas and calculations made about this offset sight arrangement, which had been instituted on the Metford and were fine. They made some calculations and they figured that the drift was going to be more with the Enfield for whatever reason. I can't tell you. It's the same rate of twist and everything, but I don't know. Somebody made some calculations and they made the manufacturing to those calculations. And when it came time to actually get issued, then they finally get into the hands of troops, and the troops are realizing that these things are shooting off. And I'm simplifying things greatly here, but essentially this problem doesn't become a problem until the Boer War. And these rifles actually, when you look at when the Lee-Enfields actually issued through photographic evidence and that kind of thing, it's not until the Boer War where these things actually get into the hands of troops in the field. And they realize that there's a major problem here. And it contributes a little bit, I think, to some of the conceptions of British musketry. Not completely, but it has some role to play in that. Suffice it to say, they figure out what the problem is, and then they institute one of three changes, some of which are field expedient and others are manufacturing changes. So obviously at that point in the factory, they make the change right there. So from that point on, anything newly made is going to have the correct offset to it. So that's done. No problem. The second one is, what about weapons or ones that are already made, but they're in store? So, the stockpile, if you will. The ones that are, Whedon is a place that most of this stuff got stored at, a big supply depot. So what do we do about all those? Because we need to fix and change them. Well, we'll pull them out and we'll dovetail. We'll grind off the barley corn and put a dovetail barley corn on there that we can adjust to the correct point, and then stake it, and then that'll be good. Okay, that's two solutions. What about the rifles in the field? And they think to themselves, geez, what do we do? Because we have to have something that's...
Tell them to aim left.
Yeah, we have to have something that's relatively expedient. Like, we can't be pulling thousands of rifles out of the field with nothing to give them in their place. So what they came up with was an offset rear sight. Which compensated for the over offsight of the front sight. Oh,
like the sliding leaf.
Both the main, like the nose cap, which has the up to 500 yards on it, and then when you lift the ladder up, the slider also. So both those notches are offset.
Both of them. Okay, wow.
And that's the field expedient workaround. So they produce a bunch of these, they send them to the field, and the armor just taps out the pin and puts on the new back sight. Good to go. And that's how they fix the problem. The fact that it was a problem in the beginning, in the first place, sure, it's a massive oversight or whatever you want to call it. But there's a number of, those background factors that do come into play in not discovering the true ramifications of the problem until it's almost too late. Now, it's not too late in the sense that we can't fight the war anymore, but it's too late in the sense that we've already made a bunch of these and we have to retroactively get them fixed. So that's the crux of the offset sight thing with the Lee-Enfield, sorry.
Yeah. So what about the people with OCD that have to stare at an offset sight when they're shooting? I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I have no problem.
That's just you, Tom.
Yeah, I like it perfectly centered.
The story that I have to tell about that is that my Metford actually has an Enfield barrel on it because it was rebuilt. It's my Mark I Metford. And so in getting it ready to shoot and then shooting it, I was realizing that things are hitting like at 100, 6 inches to the right. And so I'm like, is that just me? Is it a problem? Like, am I not, like, your hold and your trigger manipulation, it's all going to play a role. But I mean, that's a lot.
6 inches. I don't know.
And it was consistent. And do I have to shoot this thing straight on? Do I have to change my body position? What's going on here? I couldn't figure it out. I had no idea. And until somebody, or where did I come across it? I can't even remember now. How I actually arrived at this. Maybe it was looking at the list of changes.
Did it have
And I just happened to be reading through it, and it was like sights on the what? What does it say? Hold on. So wait a minute. And I found the reason was this offset piece. And then I went on the hunt for a site, and somebody I had spoken to on the British Military Forum, he had said, well, try this guy on eBay. So I contacted this guy on eBay who has a bunch of Lee-Enfield parts. And he's like, I didn't see one listed, but I just sort of emailed him out of the blue. And I said, do you have one of these offset sites? Apparently they exist. He said, oh yeah, I've got a couple. I just don't have them listed right now. You want one? I'm like, yeah, yes, please.
Wow.
So I ended up with an offset rear sight, which I slapped on my Lee Metford, and it shot to sights. It shot perfectly. And so it's a cool story that I have in my back pocket, that I arrived at the problem in the same way they did historically.
Yeah.
And it was exactly like, you can measure it exactly. When I've got a calculator, like a spreadsheet that actually calculates accuracy data that I made.
All right. Cool.
And there's a function in that spreadsheet that if you enter your sight radius and then your MPI and your point of aim, it'll tell you the difference, and it'll tell you how to adjust your sights so that everything lines up. And it gives you a left and right and up and down. And it gives you options. Like you can either move your front sight left or your rear sight right, kind of thing, right? And move it this much in thousandths. Right. And I looked at all the data I collected in working up the rifle, because I was trying to get small groups about the different loads that I was trying and all this kind of stuff. Because that's why I started reloading 303s, because I wasn't going to shoot commercial expensive stuff. I wanted something economical. And now I have a Metford, and let's get on this. So that's why I ramped all the 303 reloading up. But in collecting all the data and working it up, I looked at my sight offset before I got the offset sight, and it was the exact difference that the documentation alluded to. It was 300s. And that's consistently what it was telling me. Move your back sight left 300s.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it was kind of cool that I arrived at exactly the right problem with the right numbers like they did historically. And I used the historical fix. So anyway, there we go.
That they figured out with pen and paper math.
Yeah. And a slide rule or something.
And a slide rule, yeah. Shit. And the trigger on these things get a bad reputation. Is that
on a Lee?
On the Lee Metford,
right? So all the long Lees, all the magazine Metfords and Enfields have a single stage trigger, and it's linked with like a knuckle and an elbow, or like a socket and a ball, instead of a lever, like the SMLE and the number 4 of a 2-stage with the 2 little bumps on it, and you pull it and it works. Yep. So they work in a different system of linkage, and so it's like a single pull off.
Is it long?
Yeah, not particularly. Like this, the general geometry of the sear is the same, right? So it's the sear's only moving the same. The sear's, apart from the linkage aspect, it's very, when you take it apart and look at it, you're like, oh, it's different, but it's very, you can see the family lineage, right? And the bent in the striker is, and the firing piece is, that's all you're moving the sear. So in my case, my Metford is quite stiff, and I don't know if that's part of the rebuilding process and something wasn't polished or ground to the same degree it should have been. It's fireable. I've shot actually very good groups out of it, just getting used to the super heavy trigger, and it's like bang, there's no easing into it whatsoever. But then I compare it to my Mark 1 Star Lee-Enfield, and there's a difference, but it's the same mechanism. So it's got to be something in the rebuilding process that kind of made it super stiff. But I have not had really any issue with either of them once you get used to it. It's not as nice as the 2-stage like SMLE or number 4 trigger, but it's serviceable.
Speaking of,
if Grand Thumb was holding it up in the air and closing his eyes and going through his trigger pull, like that's 4 or 5. Like, oh, it's he'd have a conniption. But for a plumber like myself, it's not really an issue.
Speaking of Lee-Enfields and SMLEs, we can jump to those, and if we talk about these, we got to get it out of the way firsthand. I think you probably know what I'm going to bring up, but rim lock.
Oh, rim lock.
How much of an issue is it? Does it happen to you? Does it happen?
Does it exist?
Okay, so the context has to be: is it a problem or was it a problem?
Okay, we'll go with was it a problem?
No. Is it a
Okay.
problem? Is it a problem? Can be. And the nuance there is that service ammunition had rounded rims. So if for whatever reason the cartridge was placed in with the rim on the wrong side of the one below it, it just rides up over top of it because the back of the rim is rounded. So it's a complete.
So it's not just stacking the rounds in the clip
in the magazine.
area, in the magazine. There, it's now lining up the rims.
Right. So if like in the event that you do have a rim on the wrong side, on the back side of the round below it, right? When you push on that round with the bolt, the because the casing, the back, like the head of the rim, the head side of the rim is rounded forward. So that round is just going to ride up over top of it. But the front part of the rim, the part that the extractor grips, is square. So you can load a magazine completely backwards with proper service ammunition. And will there be a little bit of resistance? Yes, there will be, but it's not like locked. If you just work the bolt properly, it'll ride up and over that rim. Now, does that kind of ammunition exist on the commercial market? It does not. And actually, Mike from Bloke on the Range actually made an inquiry. I think it was to S&B, is if they changed their 303 rim to a rounded rim, so it was more historical. And I think the answer was no. But it was, it's something that is around in the modern context because of factory ammunition having square-edged rims on the front and back. But interestingly enough, the geometry of a rifle magazine and the way you charge it, your rounds in the charger are like up, down, up, or down, up, down, depending on which way you're looking at it. So they're symmetrical. The charger's not loaded asymmetrically, like all ramped up one way. So because it's intended, just you can use it either way. You just take it out of the pouch, put it in the charger bridge, and push. And when you do that, they all end up in the magazine in the right way. It's just the way the thing works. So
actually I made a video testing this with.
Did you? And what were your findings?
I believe I'm trying to remember. I did get rim lock, like to where I had to get in there and play with the rounds in the magazine with my P14, not with my SMLE.
Ah, okay.
I believe that was with commercial ammo, though. I was trying to at that point. I was trying to.
So there's two things. Is that one? It's very dependent. If you're using actual proper Mark 7 service ammo, it's got a rounded rim on it. And if you look at it, there's a radius on that rim. In the diagrams, there's that radius there. And when you look at a real one, there's a radius on the back. And that's why that radius is there, to limit the effect of having an improperly charged magazine.
Yep.
So, it's something that people talk about, and, it's a red herring, because you can't talk about a rifle used during that era and whether it was good or bad based on an experience that is solely related to a modern aspect of in this case the ammunition you're using. You just how could you do that? It's like saying that that something about like the gas used in a car back then. That same car using today's gas runs like crap because there's no lead in it. But if you use gas from the era it was made in, it runs perfectly. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's that same kind of argument. So to tell me that this antique car is crap because it doesn't run well, because the gas is crap, or doesn't like the gas that we have today. Well, okay, sure. But is that the basis of saying this thing is crap? When if you use period gas, it works just fine? Well, okay.
No, that
put a bit of
nuance.
Put a bit of nuance to that, and the argument kind of falls apart, in my mind anyway. Now, have I ever had experienced problems with that? Well, sure, because I'm using either commercial ammunition or at least modern brass, right? But I mean, you can feel that on the bolt. You feel that when you start pushing the bolt forward, and you can feel that it has happened. And you literally have to just push down and up, and that round will reseat itself in the magazine, and you're good to go. So, and as he said, in charging magazines, I can't remember when I had a real issue, and that's loading them in the service way with modern brass. So, has it happened? Sure, but it's not like every time I use the rifle, it's got some sort of jam to it. Like, not at all.
Right. That's that. If it was an issue, it would happen every other time, or
Well, you'd figure, especially the way some people talk about it, you'd figure it happens all the time.
You would figure that
it just doesn't. So
no,
that's
I've had a few issues, and I think it's the bent lips on the magazine. I think is my issue.
Right, and there's all kinds of that because obviously the magazine's not in any way, shape, or form something that we'd be accustomed to today in terms of the standard that magazines have arrived at. That magazine comes out of the 1890s, and with modifications.
Right.
But that's these little tiny pieces of metal that are curved over the top that are just holding, and if one gets bent slightly, on the right side, every time the round is exposed on that side, it sits too high, and then it jams itself into the feedway or something, but that's inherent in the magazine, not necessarily the ammunition, right?
Right.
There's all kinds of these little nuances that may exist, but in my mind, they all have a context, and it's when looking at that context that you can then realize, is this something valid? That is this like an inherent, deficiency in the design or something like that? Well, and sometimes it isn't, because there are other factors that we don't have access today that would mitigate that. So
I'd agree with that. I think that's pretty much what I found. I was using like the 1980s German Min contract ammo.
Okay.
I think it had the rounded rims, or slightly rounded at least.
Yeah. And you can, sometimes you have to look quite carefully at it, but it's noticeable, like a Mark 7 service ammo. You can really tell, and especially when you look at any diagrams of any 303, that ordnance diagrams and that kind of stuff, it's got a radius on it for sure, and that's specifically why that radius is there, so it allows that rim to ride over it and continue feeding. So it's one of those red herring things, just like Mad Minute stuff, and people just get super fixated on it, and it's, in my mind anyway, it's got an answer, like we've just discussed now, and the instant that maybe somebody's not aware of that answer, but once you do become aware of it, it kind of takes that whole discussion point completely out of it.
Right. That's how I feel right now. I wasn't aware of the rounded one side and all that. Now I'm like, all right, that's the problem.
You didn't watch my video, Tom?
Oh,
wow.
Maybe I forgot.
On your own channel.
I forgot. That's another thing I do. I'll watch something, read something, then forget, and watch it again and go, oh shit, I knew this. So
yeah,
sorry. It happens.
I'm just waiting for the first day I make the same video again. That's going to be one of the...
That would be funny. In video games, now we've already said a gun can't win a war or lose a war, but in video games, the Enfield having 10 rounds is really important, and it's key in a lot of games. But in real life, on the battleground, are we still saying it's cool, but not really
it has an advantage, obviously, in my mind. But if you're out, then is your buddy beside you out? Because you rarely fight. Warfare of the era is not something that's, how do you put it? Like, that movie 1917 where the two guys go out and they have to go and deliver the message. Like, that's like a video game, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like two guys walking across like forever across no man, like those kinds of situations, just in the context of warfare of the age, it just don't exist like that. So often I think in the modern concept, you think of like your rifle and the guy that you're hunting, or the guy that's hunting you, and you're defending yourself, and it's all about how fast you can put the magazine in and all that kind of business. It all has a sort of when you put it in the context of a war, there's a guy beside you, and a guy beside him, and a guy beside him, and you're part of a section, or part of a platoon, part of a company that's all doing something together. So that aspect of, like we talked about the at the beginning, when we talked about the P14 and the SMLE, and if they had P14s, the outcome would have been the same. Well, because like in that sense, if you exhaust your magazine and have to reload in the 4 seconds it takes to whip a charger out and charge your magazine, Well, the guy beside you isn't at that point yet. He's still shooting. And then you start shooting again and he runs out. But then that whole thing is replicated all along the line. Because let's face it, once you fire 10 rounds, if you fire more than 10 rounds, then everyone's the same.
Right.
Right. Because it's faster to load 5 and fire and 5 and fire than it is to load 10 and fire, 10 and fire. That's what I found.
And so if you have 20 guys on each side, let's say the Enfield guys will have twice as many rounds.
Well, for 10 rounds, there's
versus Mauser.
The guys with a Mauser, there's going to be a pause at some point, right? But then that pause isn't necessarily going to come together at the same time with everybody. So I'm just kind of the hard edge of that reload is taken off by the fact that there's more than one of you there. Because in a video game, you're running around, you're shooting, and then time to reload, and there's that few seconds it takes for the program. You do a little animation and put the rounds in, and then you're good to go again. And yes, in a video game, you don't have to do that after 10 rounds. But does that really simulate what the circumstances would be like on a battlefield? Yeah, I would move that there's a lot more to it than just that.
So there was an advantage, but not a war. It wasn't the war winner, let's just say.
It 100% wasn't the war winner. I'll tell you what the war winner was, and that was the 8-inch howitzer that was 2 miles behind the line. That's what won the war, 100%. It was artillery.
No, the Americans joining won the war. Hello.
And on like a similar topic, but this one has at least a little more historical context and commentary, is the speed of the action itself, because you can obviously the Mad Minute, but I mean there's a lot of hoopla about that. But there's like some commentary from like troops on the line saying they appreciated the speed of the action, how quickly they could fire accurately, and things like that. Which that's probably really more down to a training thing. But do you think the speed of the action had lended itself to that?
Well, it's undoubtedly it is speedier and slicker than the Mauser, as an example. The bolt doesn't travel as far, so the movement that you're putting into it isn't as gross.
Right, right? Isn't it like a 60-degree?
Well, there's not so much. I'm thinking not so much in the terms of the rotation aspect of it.
Oh,
but it is also the distance the bolt has to travel back and forth. In that the Mauser's got, even with the 95, you can notice it when you're working the bolt, is it comes back a lot farther.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I mean, it's a tiny little difference, but there is a difference that you can feel. But and I've done rates of fire comparisons with the Ross, the SMLE, the Mauser, and the Enfield, all kind of 10 round kind of thing. And the Lee action to me it's familiar. I'm quite used to it. I'm by no means sort of a uber expert, but I noticed that when I shot that the Boer Mauser Enfield comparison, I mean, I could feel that difference. Now, is it something that was going to ultimately, I'm shooting at somebody 400 yards away and they're running around, and then I'm, like those differences are completely lost. And, video games are all played at, 10 yards, right? Like in terms of distance in the game, right? Well,
some.
Sure.
They're getting more realistic now. So
first-person shooters, unless you're some guy with a sniper thing and a scope and whatnot, you can't see through your sights well enough to shoot at somebody who's 300 yards away in the game. It's just the nature of what you're looking at in terms of the screen. But you can in reality. But when you're not far away, you're not shooting that fast. You can't shoot that fast because you can't aim that fast.
All right.
So your bolt, you can if you're shooting at 500 yards at a head and shoulders or something like that, then the rate of effective fire that you're able to produce with a M1 or a Lee-Enfield is going to be very similar. Why? Is because so much of that time is taken up with aiming.
So, do you remember the 1914 record? Number of rounds fired in 1 minute into a 12-inch target at 300 yards.
You're baiting me now. That's what you're doing. You're baiting me.
No.
You need to watch my part 4 video.
It's not a real number?
Well, first of all, we don't know that guy actually existed.
Shit.
Seriously, I did a whole video on this.
Okay,
I did two videos on it.
I was watching the gun videos. I didn't watch the.
I did a series on the musketry of 1914.
I was in that too. Shit. I didn't see
Yeah,
it.
and part 4
Okay.
is the myth busting part, and there's 4A and B, and that deals with rapid shooting in general. And Mike from Blue Oak on the Range helped me out with that one, and did help me with the preamble, in which case he lists about 10 internet quotes about the Mad Minute, and all of which are different. One of which sounded very similar to the one you just said. And the process, the point being is that in examining what these are saying and examining what actually was the case in terms of the historiography behind it, in terms of the details of what he was shooting at, and then also the fact that there's no record of this man anywhere, all come into play. Jesse Wallingford was a man. He actually was a very good shot in the British Army. He was an Olympic shot for Great Britain, and ended up emigrating to New Zealand, and then came back with the New Zealand Expeditionary Force and fought at Gallipoli. So this man actually existed, and he was an authoritative shot. And if you want to call it the record before this Snoxall guy, he had it. He had it.
How many?
So rapid shooting. And what is it? What is Snoxall?
38.
So was Wallingford 36?
Wow, that's a lot.
It was something like that.
They say it says the standard is 15 for a standard soldier. Is that true? Around 15?
So the practice was 15 rounds in 1 minute at 300 yards.
Okay.
At a second class figure target. So that's the terminology used for a 4-foot target with a figure in the middle, and the figure looks like an hourglass, which is meant to simulate a soldier with a peak cap shooting over a wall. So it's just his head.
Oh wow!
So what you're seeing in that hourglass is like the bottom of his face, the rifle's right in front of it, and then his peak cap. If you can imagine a peak cap, like a bus driver or something, like a military cap from the era, and how it flares out at the top.
Mm-hmm.
That's the silhouette that little hourglass represents, and it's 12 inches high. And then because it's asymmetric, it doesn't equate into a full dimension, but it's 12 inches high and about 10 inches to 8 inches wide, depending on what part of it you measure. And then there's a series of rings. There's an inner, a magpie, and an outer on that target. And the target, and what the statement of the rapid shooting record actually states is that everything was in the inner, which is a 2-foot circle. The aiming mark, or the bullseye, because it wasn't a bullseye in the sense of a round mark, it was this hourglass figure shape, was 12 inches. So, and it's very easy when you walk through and actually examine the details to place everything correctly. So the target was a normal service target. This is the target that everybody shoots at. So there's no deviation in that, and that makes sense. That part of the reason of rapid shooting demonstrations, of which there were there to prove to the men that rapid shooting to this degree could be done. And guess what? Even more. So these records, so to speak, are being demonstrated. These feats of rapid shooting are being demonstrated by very skillful men who have had lots of practice and who are instructors at the School of Musketry. So there's the context of rapid shooting demonstrations. So
these guys are good at. These guys were good at it.
These guys are really good at it, and they basically have like unlimited ammunition to practice with, and they get good and better and better. So that's one aspect to this whole thing. Now, what gets translated into the zeitgeist is that this is all British soldiers. Well, it's not, because British soldiers get 150 rounds or whatever. I can't remember the number. That's what they fire every year. They don't get a bucket of bullets and say, "Hey, go practice your rapid shooting, like till the bucket's done, and don't come back until you're good." Like, no, that's not the way the Army works. The Army, your company goes to the range and you get your turn to shoot, and it's spread out over a number of days, and you shoot practice 1 and 2 on the first day, and then you rotate into the butts, and then you're done for the day, and then you come back the next day, shoot 3, 4, and 5, and you come back the next day. That's the way it works. And so the reality of rapid shooting was that there was a practice in the classification group of practices that your score was based on. There was 3 different groups of practices. You shot an instructional group, which is basically some basic practices to get yourself, settled. And for new shooters, it was just an introduction into all the different types of shooting, grouping, application, snap shooting, rapid shooting. And then you went to what's called instructional. Sorry, I'm having a brain fart. Anyway, another series of practices which were like developmental practices. So there was a bit more, variation in range. There was different numbers of rounds shot at these different distances, and it was the intent there was just a body of practices that would just develop your shooting skills, or give you the opportunity to develop your shooting skills. And then once those were done, you went into the classification practices, which was like your test. And in that test section of practices, there was one, number 22, that, and they were numbered sequentially through all 3 groups. So there wasn't 22 classification practices. There was like 7. So at 22, that's when you shot your 300-yard rapid. And at the time, it would have been called practice 22, or we're shooting a 300-yard rapid. It wouldn't have been called a mad minute or something like that. It would have been just in Army speak, whatever it is we're going to do. And you started with 5 rounds, 4 in the mag, 1 in the chamber. And then you had, in the pouch, you had 10 more rounds. So that's all you were given. You were given 15 rounds for that practice. You didn't have this bucket of bullets beside you.
And you couldn't do that with rim lock. If you had rim lock, you couldn't do this test.
You wouldn't have had rim lock. You would not have had rim lock. So then you fired your 15 rounds at this target, and you were scored based on where you hit. 4, 3, 2, 1, I think it was. For rapid shooting, it was 3, 2, 1, because the figure and the inner ring was both worth the same amount of points. So it didn't matter if you hit the figure, you just had to get it inside that ring for maximum points. And so your 15 rounds times 3 is 45 points. That was the maximum, highest possible score. You fired your 15 rounds. If you went over a minute, then those rounds didn't count. But if you fired them all off in 55 seconds, great. If you fired them off in 30 seconds, great. If you fired them off in 10 seconds, great.
Is this the point where they figure out who's the sniper, sharpshooter candidates? Or
yeah, there was a point, and there was a series of practices called the sniper's test, which I guess was the prospects were put to see if you could, but this wasn't necessarily part of that test.
So this is rifle proficiency, I guess.
Yeah, and so that was it. And then you went on to practice 23.
Like, so you had to shoot.
No, you didn't.
No, I mean you had to shoot a certain number of points in the minute, even if you didn't.
No.
Or you had to shoot all 15.
It was an aggregate score from the first practice of the classification practice.
Oh, okay. That was all
the way through. Okay. It was a total score, and your total score gave you your grade as a marksman or not. So you're a marksman, first class, second class shot, and that's the total score of all those practices put together gave you that end score, which then put you in a category. So if you and the numbers work out this way, you can shoot every single practice and do quite well on it, and not even shoot practice 22 or 22. You don't shoot it, or shoot all 15 rounds into the dirt and still come out as a marksman.
Because you have to aggregate. Yeah.
It's an aggregate score.
That's funny.
Right? So all these things about the Mad Minute that you had to shoot 15 rounds in had. That was the intent. I'm not saying it wasn't. And people were hyper focused on shooting quickly. Like dummy round practice, the chain of command would have been very adamant that everybody is proficient at this and everyone's got to get your 15 rounds. And you know what? You, Private Smith, you're only shooting 10 rounds a minute here. That's not good enough. Extra practice for you with the dummy rounds. Get going. Get in there in the barrack room with your mates and practice with the dummy rounds. And work your bolt skills, like working the bolt quickly, putting the penny on the barrel or on the forestock to try and keep your aim still when you squeeze the trigger. All that kind of marksmanship stuff. Practice, so that when you get to the stage, you can load and fire and work the bolt fast enough that you have the time to aim at 300 yards and hit that target in 15 rounds in a minute. So that's the context. That's the paradigm that the whole rapid shooting falls under. So I'm not saying you
Right.
say you have to. No, you don't have to. Other than that is the culture of the day. That is what the expectation is. But in terms of the score, in terms of your qualification,
Well,
you technically don't.
I mean, you're pretty much saying that there's a possibility, technically, that everyone missed the target and they still passed as marksmen. When you think about it, everyone
Well,
could have
sure.
done good on
Well,
all the other parts and not
or,
on the
or
shooting.
or you just do really well on the rapid shoot and you shit the proverbial bed on the rest of it and score
Right.
really, really bad, and then you don't become a marksman, but you got a perfect score on the rapid because
That
it's
would
an
be
aggregate.
strange. All right. That
So
is
so
weird.
that's the sort of the reality of that whole mad minute thing. That there's the two sides of it. There's the service shooting and what a soldier would have been experienced at and would have been practiced to in terms of the ability to shoot live, which is guarded in terms of your annual allotment and your qualification. And there's this many rounds for this one. Practice number 6 is 5 rounds at 300 yards. An application shoot at a like it's very regimented. And so this whole rapid shooting and have to do it. The myth gets confused with the reality. Yes, to say that you have to do it, it's not by the numbers you have to do it. It's by the expectation. It's by the culture you have to do it. Right.
Right.
And you got extra pay if you did well on that classification practice course. So if you shot at a marksman or a second class, or sorry, marksman or first class, you got your it's like first class proficiency pay, and you got, which is like an extra 6 pence a day or something. And then if you got a second class shot, you got 3 pence a day. And if you didn't get second class shot, you got no extra bonus.
Aw.
And
Well,
so
incentive.
your pay was completely associated with how well you shot. So, you had to shoot to a reasonable standard. But that
That's
whole
cool.
must shoot piece is not the accurate to say that in the least. Right.
Yeah, you could say you could say it. It's bullshit. You could say it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just, it's the internet is all it is.
Yeah, exaggerated like telephone.
Right. That, it was very interesting figuring all that out and realizing that, and there's some guys who could even shoot like 30 rounds a minute. Well, like who? And
Well,
sure,
I'm gonna
these
watch that.
guys who are putting on the displays and the demonstrations, yes, but these are instructors that are at a school. They're not, Private Smith in, X battalion, right? Because the Private Smith X battalion doesn't have, an extra 100 rounds to practice rapid shooting with. He can do it with dummy rounds all day long, but not real. So you only get good at something like that by shooting properly live. And the only people that can afford the time and the resources, or who are afforded the time and resources to do that and get that good, are people in schools, instructors who are good to begin with, but then they have the opportunity to go out and practice and practice and practice. So there's that aspect. There's two different sides of the story in terms of the quote unquote mad minute. Suffice it to say, 15 rounds a minute at 300, you're not taking your time. And that standard of shooting was far and above the standards expected in other armies of the era. So to say that the British Army shot well, yes, it did. To say probably the best shooting army of the era, you could definitely say that as a generality. But then making claims of, because invariably it's not 15 rounds a minute, and then there's something added to it, like, and some could shoot 30.
Yeah.
Well, does that mean that, what's that based on? And they're not basing it on anything other than some of them could shoot that fast because they've heard this legend of Snoxall, or they heard of Wallingford. And he's another guy. So more guys must have been able to do that. So I'll just generalize and say, well, some could even do this. Like the Wikipedia article used to be horrendous on the Mad Minute. But if you go to the Mad Minute now, it's actually toned down to reality, relatively. But that's it was a very interesting project that I did on the channel in terms of I shot every practice. I shot every practice in the way it was intended to be, at the right range, in the right circumstances, et cetera, et cetera. So I had to make some minor changes with barricades that I needed to produce that, it was supposed to be done from a trench, but I'm not digging a trench out there, and so I'll stack logs up and I'll use that as the parapet kind of thing. Those are the kinds of differences, right? But I shot practice 23, and I can't remember what I scored. I think I got all rounds in the inner except for 3 or 4. So I scored like 42 out of 45 or 41 out or something like that. Anyway, a decent score. I was happy with it.
Marksman.
But I literally fired my last round at like second 59, 58 seconds. I fired the last round. So
all right, you got it out.
I wasn't this like unlimited speed shooting. Now, I've done lots of speed shooting in the context of rapid fire, like ultimate rapid fire, at targets at 100 yards. It's all over the place, but I'm shooting as fast as I can. At a target, mind you. I'm not just making noise. I'm shooting at a target, trying to hit it, and as fast as I can. And I've got 31 rounds.
Wow.
Is my record.
So starting with how many?
Starting with 11.
Okay. And then so you still had to reload a few times.
A full magazine plus one. So I did, I've done it a few times on video.
That's cool.
And the first one was for a internet comp or YouTube competition away, like in 2000 and I don't know, 12 or something. And he was like, "Yeah, let's do a rapid fire competition." So I just went out and shot, and that was shot with commercial ammunition, and I was like 20 rounds or something. And then I did it again, and that one I shot 30, I think. Anyway, that was 11, good. And I shot 6, and then I loaded 5 and shot 6. And then I kept loading 5 and shooting 6. So the magazine's gradually getting farther and farther down, but I'm making up time because I'm not loading at 5 rounds. I'm loading at 6 rounds. So I get another extra round in. That was the thought anyway. And then the last one I did as part of that project, I think it was something, it was like 1 round more, I think, or maybe not. And that one was just 11 and then shoot 5. 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5.
Wow.
But
you have to be so
project,
fast. I mean, 2 seconds per round when you do 30, right? So that's crazy.
Yeah. And it's certainly eye-opening. Is it fun? Absolutely. But there's some things to it that you never think about, like how tired you get. Because you're holding your breath. You're holding your breath to try and hit the target. Like so you're having to breathe in a rhythm and that kind of thing. And and just you're grunting to try and hold your breath so you can hit the target, and then you're working the bolt, and then you're loaded, and it's amazing how actually like not like you've run 500.
No, like if you go swim underwater and you come up, you're out of breath, and
there's definitely an aspect that you weren't necessarily expect when you're shooting that. When I'm shooting that fast, but also aspects of that type of shooting I talk about in the video that that weren't part of service shooting, like shooting out of a trench. So I shot off a bench that replicated the parapet of a trench so that the rifle is rested, my elbows are rested, I'm leaning into it, so I've got the best possible stable kind of conditions to be in. I'm using the sling, because another piece to that rapid shooting is the fact that the rifle starts moving around on you, and then your hand gets sweaty, and then it's not, you lose grip on the forestock or something like that. But by having the sling wrapped around your arm in a normal conventional target fashion, kind of helps keep everything together.
Right, pulls it tight.
So there's all these little things that necessarily, like shooting with a sling was not allowed in service shooting.
During the test.
Well, for anything, you were not allowed to use the sling when you shot in terms of your annual qualification or any of that. A sling was for carrying your rifle when you needed your hands. It wasn't for shooting. Is the mentality behind it. And so with these rapid shooting, demonstrations, is there we'll never know for sure, but in terms of the ultimate rapid fire, would you not take all these measures into play to give yourself an advantage that way? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe they just shot them prone, unsupported like everybody else. Maybe they were that good. Anyway, so it's a subject that I talk about in the project because it was something that I felt I had to talk about after going through the actual musketry course and, qualifying at the end and getting my score and everything. And then it was like, so how does this, in particular, one part of it translate into this myth that's out there? And then so it's all laid out in terms of, you know, every aspect of it, the size of the target, the aspects of being able to shoot. You know, some guys could shoot as much as 30 or 35 rounds or whatever the myth says. It's like, well, how do you know that? Because this is what every man got. There wasn't this pool of ammunition to draw from. I just talk about that. It was very interesting to me to walk all through it and actually sort of address all of the aspects of the myth in our as rationally as I could. Anyway, I found it very
I'm gonna check
I
it out,
enjoyed
Mark.
putting it all together.
I'm gonna check it out. But I didn't get up to 4.
Yeah, so
That's I was jumping around. So
there's 8. I think there's 8 videos in total.
All right.
8, 7, 8, something like that. The part 1 is just the introduction to musketry. Then part 2 is training, like how they were trained, and then part 3 is a 4-part or 5-part about all the quality of the shooting. So there's there's the 3 groups of practices, and then there's 2 on field firing, which is like tactical shooting out in the field, which was part of their training. It wasn't just shooting on a range; it was out unknown distances, maneuvering as a group, all that kind of stuff. So, and then part 4 is in 2 videos, and it talks about the myth of the Mad Minute. So anyway,
I need to try out some of those qualifications. They seem fun.
They're surprisingly modern. You know, like exposures, targets coming up and disappearing, and you've got 5 seconds to shoot it, and you're at 300 yards, kind of stuff. And the target comes up for 5 seconds and then down. So it's all something that's done on a classification range with, you know, target frames that move up and down and people in the butts working the targets. But arguably that kind of same stuff happens today. So it has an interesting modernity. Is that the word? It's when you look at it, it's not just like boring bullseye shooting. There's snap shooting, there's rapid shooting, there's grouping at the beginning to see how small you can get your group, and then application, making sure you hit what you're aiming at, you know, at different ranges, all that kind of stuff. And it goes out to 600 yards is the maximum.
That sounds fun.
At a great big 6-foot target.
So
finding a place I could shoot at 600 was a bit of a challenge, but I got it done.
Yeah, 600's far. So a lot of people say the Ishapur #1 Mark IIIs are like the shittiest ones for some reason.
Yeah.
But can you pick any manufacturer you think is the best or worst, or are they all very similar to you? Like is Long Branch close to your heart?
Well, I guess it's funny. My number four is a Long Branch that ended up in New Zealand, and now came back to Canada. And anyway, so that's an interesting story there. But
so you're biased towards those?
I think in the end, it's in terms of what I would aim at, right? Quote unquote, pardon the pun, is the same kind of process that we've talked about before. Is that it has to shoot. So if I came across an Indian SMLE that was in good condition and shot well, then I'd have no issue with it.
Yeah, I heard that they were made just as well. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
I haven't heard too many bad things.
It was a British factory, right?
Yeah,
it was just in India, so it's making the same rifle now. Maybe post independence, especially when a lot of these things get made and then got remade and then got turned into 7.62 and that kind of thing. Then you might look at there might be difference in quality. I mean, but Indian stuff, even equipment and that kind of thing that was made in India during the war wasn't necessarily to the same standard. I don't own one, so it's not something I can, actually put my finger on and say, look at the difference here. But I mean,
as far as how about as far as any of them now, like the RSAF, Enfields, Birmingham's?
No, I don't care. Some of them will have different rifling, right? Some will have 2-groove rifling.
Oh, true.
Some of them will have 5-groove.
Yeah,
I had a number 4 that had 2-groove in it. That it was the wood was starting to rot out on it, but the barrel was fine. And then I came by the number 4 that I have now, which has a 5-groove barrel. But they figured that the 2-groove rifling worked just fine, and it was easier to make, so they made it. Now, were rifles made after the war in 2-groove? No. So there was something there, but they went back to 5-groove after the war. But yeah, it's not something that I would spend much time trying to generalize about. Quite frankly, it's something I'd more look at, individually. Like if I was in the market for a number 4, I wouldn't necessarily start looking with Indian ones or a number. Sorry, SMLEs. I wouldn't start looking at Indian ones. But if nothing was around and all of a sudden one came that was in really good condition, then I wouldn't have a problem for sure.
And did we ask you, did you prefer the number 1 Mark III or the number 4? Or we know you don't prefer the number 5.
Yeah, well, the number 5's, I don't have a problem with it as much as.
Well, historically, it's not so.
Well, true enough, but it's also got this kind of boutique kind of quality associated with it that, I don't. I'm not a fanboy. How's that? So there's some people that just adore it. I don't consider myself to be a fanboy, or if that's a phrase you can use.
Yeah, I took it to the range last, and it was uncomfortable to shoot. I didn't really enjoy it that much.
Oh no,
no.
See, I didn't have that experience at all.
No, I didn't.
And that was with S&B. I don't know what you were using, but
I was shooting a number 1 and then this, so maybe it was the comparison between the two.
Certainly, the SMLE's got a better in the hand. I find it feels better in the hand. If you can take any of the innuendo out of that, then the number 4 is just made differently. It's a bit chunkier.
Yep.
But the SMLE's just got finer lines to it. So I would say I'm based on that. But then the sights on the number 4 are way better.
Yeah, I do love shooting my number 1. It does just feel right.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we just have a couple of true false. One we already just answered. One of them is Lee-Enfields are mostly low quality. So we just said that's not true.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not.
Well, we don't know, but I don't think it's true. In my quick research on it, they said that they used high quality steel even on the 2A1, NATO conversions. So
they also saw a lot of use post-war, so that's probably why a lot of them are in rougher condition.
That's a very good point to make too. Right? There's a lot of fighting and wars fought out that way after independence, right? So, like they fought Pakistan for how long? If you can still say they're fighting them today?
Yeah, ever.
Right.
There's a lot, and they got used a lot, like by the police and all that kind of stuff. So whatever you're looking at may have had 50 years of hard life to it. So to then turn around and say, "Oh, look at this thing, it's crap." Well, was it crap when it was made, or is it crap now because it's just beat up?
Or it could be stored in a barn with goat shit all over it. Like
true enough.
Some places. Be honest.
Speaking of beat up rifles, for this true or false, FTR on a Lee-Enfield means factory thorough repair or factory, I guess this isn't a true or false, or factory through repair or something else.
I always thought it was thorough.
Yeah, there's been a lot of quote unquote official things that put factory through repair, factory to repair.
I mean, it stands for the process of getting a complete once over and rebuilding whatever needs to be rebuilt so that it's good to go, right?
Yeah, I think
and
so
refinishing
too.
of parts and rebluing of parts, and so it comes out of there basically brand new. So I'm just looking for what book would I have to look at that?
Do you have a library, or you have books all over? What's your
I've got
situation?
I had it was at one point it was all in one room, but since then it's become much larger and it's spread out a bit more.
See, that's what your wife lets you have around the house.
Yeah, books. That's right, books. I think it's downstairs, so I don't have it up here. But that's another Scatterton book. Probably the Lee-Enfield Bible, if you're going to get one book on the Lee-Enfield. And
is there a Martini-Henry book? One?
Yep,
book
the Martini-Henry book is Neil Aspinshaw's For Queen and Empire.
Oh, you said that. Okay, that's the one. Okay.
Yep. It's by far the best resource on the Martini. And as I mentioned, not just the rifle itself, but then all the subvariants and the carbines and its issue, the ammunition, some of the equipment, the bayonets. Just trying to think. That book I do have right here, and I'll just and some of the operational history and how it pertains to the Zulu Wars and as I mentioned, the Sudan Here we go. Boxer Ammunition and the Great Jamming Debate, Chapter 18.
Ooh,
So
there you go, Tom.
Yeah.
there. So literally, if you're at all interested, if you just Google for Queen and Empire, the Martini-Henry, or vice versa, or Neil Aspin-Shaw, Aspin Shaw, then you'll get to it on the internet anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know how much they run for, but Neil's a good friend of mine, and again, I'm not saying that his book's good because he's a friend, because it is a really good book. This is his life's work kind of deal put into this book, so it was a welcome addition to the library for sure.
All right, I'll look into that. All right, I think we covered a lot here in our
We definitely covered a lot.
6 days of hanging out here today.
Yeah.
A few things here and there.
Well,
Yeah.
it feels like an hour, so I don't know if you guys
that's awesome.
feel that same way, but I always love talking about this stuff.
Oh yeah, it's been great.
Same with me.
Especially if there's questions, then if I can answer them, I'm happy to answer them, because I think the genre it's obviously it's the interest that I hold, and that's why the channel exists. And I also understand that it's not necessarily the sort of the go-to genre, the go-to subject material of a lot of people. So if there's somebody that's interested somewhat in it, then I'm happy to blab on about it.
Yes, it's something that seems daunting. So I've been weary of digging too deep.
It's not that daunting though.
No, you've helped me here. You've discussed it and explained them all, and it's just like everything else. Now I'm seeing it.
Yeah.
I collect World War II and World War I rifles. It's just black powder. That's all.
Well, you put it in the context of
be afraid.
What's going on in the empire. There are some confusing parts to it. You don't really get into the like the marks and stars aspect until you get into the Lee series.
Right.
And that's when it gets kind of really, I don't say convoluted, but that's where you see the proliferation of that kind of stuff. The Sniders to a little bit. The Martinis just go from 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then there's some subtypes that sometimes get letters affixed to them.
Yeah, but even the flintlocks.
And the
They
flintlocks
all were blending together to me because I was getting them confused. But now I've gotten them straightened out now.
Right.
My Besses and my 1776s and
that's right.
Which came first, Baker, the Brunswick.
Right, the Brunswicks, the Bakers.
Baker, Brunswick, in that sense. We didn't talk a lot about the Newland Light Infantry musket. It came along, and it was one of those serving in parallel, and it was only issued to light troops. You had a little brass scroll type trigger guard, so a bit of a pistol grip on it, and it had a back sight. It had a back sight, but otherwise was the same kind of. It was the same smoothbore flintlock musket. So just a little bit easier, nicer to shoot. Had with the sight and the pistol grip on it. So it was issued more than the Newland pattern. But there's things like that kind of work in parallel that have a little niche that they fill.
Right.
But then you take that one step back, and then there's the general issue arm, which of course at that time would have been the India pattern Brown Bess or the India pattern musket. We see the same thing in Canada too. When the Martini gets issued we buy a bunch in the early 70s, 2,100 of them, but then we never issue them, and they get held in store, and then they get issued in little dribs and drabs or to shooting clubs, predominantly because as the empire is moving to 45 caliber in terms of shooting competitions, you can't compete with a Martini with a Snider. It's just Martini's ballistically way better. And so, but in order for Canadians to be able to compete in that realm, they issue out these Mark I Martinis to clubs or shooting organizations. Some of them military, some of them pseudo military, and then you don't see Martinis around really until the 1890s, when they get issued in part to the artillery of all places. And
it's crazy to think that they're worried about all this in the 18s, whatever this is, 60s and 70s.
Yeah,
worried about shooting competitions and for their country and releasing the guns so they can go and
shooting was a huge deal in the 18. It came out of Britain in the volunteer movement in the essentially the 1860s, based on a French invasion scare. and they basically created sort of the modern day, what you might like in the States would be like the National Guard.
Oh, right. Okay.
And that comes out of that, and that turns into a they were never great like field, and never intended to be really hardcore field soldiers, because it was one part-time. But the thing that they gravitated to was shooting, and so the whole NRA began in Great Britain, and Queen Victoria fired the first round of the first gathering at 500 yards, I think it was, and it hit the target like 2 inches off the center, and
Really?
fired a Whitworth rifle with a silken string. There's
Wow.
engravings, there's pictures of the actual rig. So it was a big deal, and that continued on, and it got promulgated. It spread throughout the empire. So shooting competitions were a big thing. And guess where they used to shoot in Britain?
Where?
Think tennis.
Wimbledon?
Wimbledon. Yeah.
Wimbledon.
Really?
And they shot at Wimbledon was musketry or shooting competition central until the 1890s. In which case, when the 303 started coming in and the ranges started to get much longer, especially with misses, that it outgrew its sort of parameters, and then they moved to Bisley.
Wow.
But that's when you hear Wimbledon used to be shooting central, not tennis central.
That's crazy.
So you get these kind of nuances, that are things don't necessarily follow along in a direct straight line, right?
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole,
which can definitely kind of mess with the understanding of things sometimes. So
it like anything else, it takes years of watching videos, reading books.
In my case, misspent time.
Same for us all.
Yeah, we're all in it one way or another. All right, so Rob, really appreciate you coming on. I have a lot more to talk to you about in the future. We'll have to have you come on and talk about some things. Maybe we'll get into the Zimmerman telegram, see if you think that's real or fake.
Locking lugs.
Yeah,
right.
some myths and rumors of maybe even the animal grease. We didn't talk about that, but that's for another time.
Right. Back to the mutiny piece.
Right. But I really appreciate you coming here and talking and giving us all this info.
I appreciate you guys having me on. It's always a pleasure talking about this stuff to fellow enthusiasts, and maybe
awesome.
the realms don't necessarily match up, but the general idea behind it all is there. We're all interested in what we're all each other's doing, and maybe next time I can ask you a few questions, because I never got to that.
and you said you have like a small network here, so if you have any questions about anything in the Mauser world or somewhere this way, don't feel free to drop a line, email, come into the Discord, whatever.
Sounds great.
Really appreciate it. All right, Kelly, good one.
Oh yeah.
Thank you, everyone.